I found an old recording of the most gruesome TV show ever broadcast. Me and Leela always carve dozens of jack-o'-lanterns every October, so they absolutely saturate our lawn on Halloween night. It was our thing. But looking back on it, now that I've lost her, I just feel bad for the pumpkins. I almost relate to them, somehow. The way they were carved up had everything of substance inside of them torn out and left as hollow, rotting shells with forced smiles. Needless to say, I didn't cope with her death well. I didn't want to cope with it. I wanted the world to drown in the black sludge of my grief. I loathed the people I saw going about their lives, unaware that the world had already ended the moment Leela died. The earth shouldn't keep spinning. Life shouldn't go on. Not without her. Even my relatives bringing me along on a trip to Kauai only made it worse. The most gorgeous place on earth, and it made me sick with hatred. Nothing that beautiful deserved to exist if Leela wasn't ever going to get to see it. It wasn't fair. I thought I'd never enjoy or care about anything again. Then I discovered media preservation. It started with taking some of Leela's old FF tapes to a video repair place to fix some issues with the footage before it is digitized. The job fascinated me. In a universe based on entropy, where everything inevitably fades away and is forgotten, restoring something lost is like snatching it from the jaws of death, right? Like flipping the bird to the universe and its so-called natural order. People die, but information doesn't have to. No, it doesn't matter how small, be it some god-awful plug-and-play licensed game, or a serial commercial from ATS. It is my mission to recover it in as high a quality as I am able, and make sure it is freely available online for as long as possible. A couple weeks ago, I came across a big haul. 4 boxes of old FF tapes offered up on eBay for dirt cheap. Most of the tapes were just recordings of Cheers episodes already preserved in higher qualities, but one Max LE-240 caught my interest. First of all, I'd never seen one so melted. Sure, sometimes they were left in an attic too long and the colors and audio start to degrade. But this one looked like it had survived a house fire. It was covered in soot and the smell of smoke, and had the overall shape of a chocolate bar left out in the sun a little too long. Second was the label, which read in neat Sharpie, -/-8/2035. The casing was so disfigured, I had to bust it apart, just pull out the tapes and respool them in a fresh cassette. I tried to iron out the creases in the tape as best I could, but I had no illusions about it accomplishing much. The mylar surface had been irreparably warped in places by whatever fire had half melted the thing. Imagine my despair at the sight of the dreaded. I could clearly see the tape wasn't blank, yet no amount of adjusting the tracking or trying different TZ or V cars accomplished anything. Just as I was about to give up, though, the thing just suddenly started playing properly at the exact instant the clock struck 3 a.m., as if it had only now decided to work. My all-nighter had paid off. I didn't dwell on the fact that this miracle fix had been impossible. If I'd had any sense, I'd have torn the horrid thing out of my vivere and buried it beneath holy ground. Instead, fool I was, I sat down and watched. At first the thing seemed unwatchable. The audio was so distorted that the show's theme song emerged as a low, crackling, staticky wail that made my head throb, and the logo was completely indistinguishable through the flickering and interference. I thought it was a lost cause for a moment. But then a figure appeared and cleared away the static, like Moses parting the Red Sea. It was the sight of the show's host that hooked me. He was just perfect. Perfect in every way. I knew it just looking at him. Infinitely handsome and likable and charismatic, and he always said the exact perfect thing. The only issue is, I don't remember a single thing about him now, in the same way you can remember a dream that seemed so clear to you while you were experiencing it. He just appears in my memory as this abstract blur in a sharp suit. Yet at the time I was awestruck, even before he said a single word. I can't even remember a word he said. It was like he was speaking another language, one I felt as opposed to heard. I'll try and transcribe it as best I can into words, but know that it is only a pathetic imitation. For another night of laughs, prizes and fun for the whole family with your host, Sharp. I noticed that the audio and visual distortion seemed to suddenly intensify the instant he said his name, rendering it completely illegible. Idiot I was, I figured that was a coincidence. Tonight is a night of celebration, folks, because thanks to the support of loyal viewers like you, we have just been approved for, get this, 200,000 more seasons. The live studio audience went wild with applause. I put that in scare quotes because, as far as I could tell, besides the host, the studio seemed completely empty. As if he was standing on a plain white stage that extended outwards into infinite darkness on all sides. For those just joining us, the game here is simple. He explained that this was some sort of a trivia show. Every time a guest got an answer wrong, it brought them a little closer to some sort of unspecified punishment. And if they got it right, he smirked. Well, they get to delay the inevitable. I wondered what he meant by inevitable. I didn't have to wonder long. The host gestured to a curtain that hadn't been there moments ago, which raised to reveal a middle-aged man. You know, the type, bushy mustache, gray hair, round-rimmed glasses. Kind of guy you'd have doing your plumbing. He couldn't look any more out of place, stood up and restrained in that. What the hell is that? I recognized that metal coffin-looking thing from a medieval torture museum I went to once. The Iron Maiden. The lid hung open, countless long, needle-like blades poking inwards, threatened to poke a million new holes in him if it was shut. His situation was not lost on him. Where am I? What the hell is this? Oh, lucky guess. The host joked. More canned laughter. I know you always loved watching those trivia shows, Malcolm. Weren't you always sitting there, grinding your teeth, seeing that it wasn't fair? That you should be the one up on stage, winning big? The man paused. Even he seemed mesmerized by the unreal perfection of the host before him. This is a game show. All you have to do is answer a few questions. Think you can handle that, Malcolm? He pulled out a cue card without waiting for an answer. And our first question. What were you doing the night of February 18, 1998? The man seemed baffled. Just sat on my couch watching the NFL, I think. I am not sure how I am supposed to remember. He let out a startled squeal as a horrid buzzer sounded. On cue, the lid slid a third of the way closed, making him flinch. Ooh, I am afraid that's the wrong answer, Frank. But you know what? I'll give you one more chance. What were you? Following a girl home. The man cried out. F from the bar. There, are you happy? Correct. The canned audience began cheering. Such honesty. Now, our second question, just what were you carrying while you followed her? He hesitated for a little too long. And then the buzzer sounded again, and the lid slid so near to closing that its blades began poking uncomfortably against his skin. He tried to press himself against the back of the maiden as well as his restraints would allow. Jesus. Okay. A knife, a knife. Oy, if only you'd said that just a second earlier. Another big question. Our third question, why, Malcolm? Why did you do it? That set Malcolm off. He started thrashing, clawing, screaming. Let me out of this thing, you maniac. You can't do this to me. Do you know who I am? Is this some sort of sick joke? My lawyers will have your head for this, you. And then the buzzer. All of a sudden, the lid slammed shut full force and the man was utterly silenced save for an unnatural, drawn-out wheeze. Another wrong answer, Malcolm. I am afraid I was looking for, because if I can't have her, no one can. I admit it. I laughed. Out of shock more than anything. How was this allowed on TV? I took it as some sort of dark comedy show, and it was kind of satisfying to see that freaky character get his comeuppance. Still, there was something unnerving to me, seeing the man's eyes through the openings in the maiden. Wide and red and terrified. They just looked a little too real. But the maiden disappeared as quickly as it came, before I could dwell on it too much. Oh, envy. Definitely one of my favorite sins. More laughter. Stay tuned, folks. We've still got a night of fun and games in store for you. But first, how is about a word from our sponsors? Cut to a corporate logo which I again couldn't recognize. This segment was made possible by Boer Health, which has recently announced a brilliant new initiative to protect our citizens from skin cancer by removing their skin completely. The camera cut to a massive industrial building resembling a solid concrete cube around 50 meters in width and height. Its surface bore arcane symbols etched using carvings of wailing, tormented faces. The host would occasionally be rendered inaudible by a deafening metallic scraping from within, though he didn't seem to notice. The only protrusion from the building's cubic shape was a single smokestack, belching a scarlet red smoke into the atmosphere. A queue of gaunt figures waited at the entrance, herded and coerced by their grim overseers, and there were no words to describe the procession of scarlet ghouls limping out the building's other end. Owing to the nonlinearity of time, the brand new grand skin peeling machine has spontaneously appeared several years before construction deadlines, and indeed, before it was even conceived of by anyone in our timeline. People have rushed all the way from Malbolge just to try this miracle of technology out on opening day, and so far, the reviews have been stellar. He shoved his microphone in the face of a shambling thing that could only scarcely be called a human. tatters of flesh clung to its exposed musculature, blowing in the wind. Its eyes were the only hint of color in that sea of bloody red, and they were wide and terrified. The thing screamed and wailed for as long as it could before the last tendons connecting its jaw to its face snapped and it was left to choke and gurgle. An amazing wail. The results speak for themselves, folks. The grand skin-peeling machine is a hit. So far, I was still laughing along and having a good time. The sight of the next guest, however, started making me nervous. It was an old lady. She couldn't be 80 younger than 60, the sort of sweet elderly woman who in a just world would be cooking chocolate chip cookies for her grandchildren in a comfy cottage somewhere. But here she was, tied to a metal chair, eyes wide, shaking like a leaf. Unlike the last contestant, she seemed to know exactly what was happening. In exchange for our loving endorsement, they agreed to loan us one of their star employees. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for the Lakeisma. Something slunk from the darkness far behind her, or perhaps it'd be more apt to say that the darkness birthed that whole cloth. It was like a living shadow, and it took my eyes a moment to register what I was even seeing. How do I even begin describing this creature? I could say it looked almost human, or at least like something that may have been human long ago. Or I could start with its skin, which was all black and shiny as latex and seemingly smooth on first glance, but if you looked closer you'd realize it was covered in a million tiny reptilian scales, almost like a shark. Its head was a bald mass, utterly devoid of any distinguishing features, like the basic stock template for a human being. It was notable only for a complete lack of pupils and irises, its eyes a pure white. Its body defied basic biology in so many key ways, I had to stare it at for what felt like an eternity just to wrap my mind around its physiology. It was at least 5 or 6 meters long by my estimate, composed of multiple human torsos stacked one on top of the other like segments of a centipede, each melding with the ones around it at the waist and shoulders. Each torso sported a pair of short, stubby arms that propelled it with terrifying grace. It ended with a pair of human legs, perpetually bent on their knees, beneath a tail that looked more like its cox was poking free from its body. The old lass could clearly hear it, and kept futilely trying to turn her head around enough to get a peek at what stood behind her. I mouthed uselessly, "Don't you don't want to know? Glad you could join us again, Miss Weathersby. Judging by our ratings last week, you seem to have been a fan favorite." Her voice was so soft, I could barely hear it below the static. "Oh God. Please, why won't you people let me go? I've told you, I've never done anything, never hurt anybody. There must be some sort of..." He waved a hand over her, and it seemed to forcefully snap her mouth shut. "Please, Miss Weathersby, save your breath for our questions." Another cue card. "Your first question, my friend, where did you and your husband buy your first home?" She had to think about it for a long time. Eventually she cried out, "Alabama. Tuscaloosa, Alabama." Ding ding ding. Why, you're already doing better than our first contestant. Next question, what breed of dog was your childhood pet? She had a pained look on her face as she thought. Eventually, a timer started ticking down. It wasn't visible, so it wasn't clear how much time she had left exactly, but the sound it made got more shrill and high-pitched with every second. "Miss Weathersby, need I remind you that we have a time limit on this show?" A tear ran down her cheek. "I keep telling you people, I don't know. I have dementia, I can't remember, please." That buzzer again. I am afraid that was the wrong answer. Lakeisma. The old lady shuddered at the sounds of hundreds of feet drawing a little closer to her. "Now, your first grandchild. What did he look like? What color were his eyes? His hair?" She was crying harder now, like it hurt her that she couldn't remember something so dear to her. "I told you I can't remember. Why are you doing this to me? If you don't remember them, why would they remember you?" The host mocked as the buzzer sounded and the beast drew a little closer. "Really, do you believe they still even think about you? Or do you think they're glad that the old bag of bones isn't there sucking up their inheritance?" This went on for God, it could have been an hour. I was glued to the screen all the while, frozen with terror, praying for this nightmare to just end, for her to make it out okay somehow. He pored over every little detail of the life she lived and the people she loved, delighting in how little of it she could still recall. And the thing grew closer and closer until she finally felt multiple pairs of hands resting upon her shoulders. The thing was looming over her now, and a long, black tongue a few feet in length emerged from its mouth and ran trails of dark saliva over the back of her head. She looked broken down, eyes raw from crying, and I could tell by the dampness of her dress that she'd wet herself. Now, Miss Weathersby, our time here has been fun, but I do believe it is time for our final question. Tell me, what is the name of your only son? She couldn't even answer anymore. She just stared ahead, like her mind was a million miles away. He cackled as the buzzer sounded one final time and threw his cue cards aside. Thank you for playing, Miss Weathersby. Better luck next time. I would say the thing unhinged its jaw like a snake, but that'd be an understatement. The way the thing's face malformed and wrinkled and stretched as it opened its maw, it no longer looked even remotely human. Its jaws must have parted at least 30 centimeters apart, revealing a second, pharyngeal pair of jaws that lashed out and gripped the woman's skull, pulling her headlong into the darkness. I could hear bones crunching and snapping as its throat constricted down around her body, peristaltic muscles compacting her into a meat slurry, bit by bit. Yet she just wouldn't die. Even as her skull and upper body were already crushed and compacted, organs and muscles pressed into mulch, she still kicked her legs, twitched her fingers, let out a gurgling that must have been some attempt at screaming. She was squirming even as the beast snapped its jaw shut around the last of her, condemning her to whatever torments awaited her inside the creature. And all the while that horrible laughter. Don't worry, folks. She'll be back next week. And the next. And the next. Needless to say, I wasn't having fun anymore. In fact, I had to turn away and fight the urge to throw up. I stood about to turn the TV off and... Don't touch the dial now. I froze. There was something chilling about the way he said that, staring right into the screen as if reacting to what I was doing. I hated that grin on his face. The real show is just beginning. And with the barely restrained excitement of a child on Christmas morning, he yanked back another curtain and I recognized everything. I recognized the crappy bootleg knockoff Always Sunny in Philadelphia jacket that was so gaudy and terrible it instantly became her favorite thing in her wardrobe. I recognized those subtle hints of slight acne she disguised as fake freckles. I recognized the way her gray eyes would remind me of those overcast mornings at the beach at Hilton Head and pointing out all the cannonball jellyfish washed up on the sands. I recognized the tattoo of the name. How I held her all night long as she cried into my shirt after her childhood cat had died. It was Leela. I shuddered, gasped, fell from my seat as if I'd been punched in the stomach and the air had been knocked out of me. I couldn't breathe. This couldn't be real. I was dreaming right now. I must be. I just had to wake up. But I couldn't wake up. Nothing I could do dispelled the sight of her curled up in that thing. The bronze statue of a bull, horns jutting on either side of a head that roaring silently up at the heavens, all while the love of my life was locked in its hollowed out belly, visible only through a pane of glass. I could hear her cry out in shock at where she'd found herself, and every whimper felt like it drove a knife through my chest. The host soaked in the moment. It was ecstasy for him, the suffering of it all. He stared dead into the camera like he was looking right at me as she called, "What is this? Where am I?" "Why, I have good news, my dear Leela. You're exactly where every American dreams of being, you're on TV." He pointed to the camera. "And we have a very special guest in the audience tonight. Your very own beloved Jackson." I shuddered, hearing my own name ooze from his fetid lips. His fade of perfection was slipping, and there was something so profoundly ugly beneath it. Her eyes snapped to the camera, confused, despairing. "Jackson. Baby. What is happening? What is this?" "I don't know," I thought, gripping the sides of the TV so hard my knuckles turned white, "but I am going to get you out of there, baby. I am going to find whoever did this and I am going to bury them all so far beneath that studio that they'll never. I am afraid Jackson hasn't joined us quite yet, my dear. But if you truly love him, surely you'll give him a show to remember, won't you?" He taunted her. "All I want, after all, is to ask you a few questions. In fact, I'll offer you a special deal, get even a single answer right and I'll let you go free. But get one wrong and, well..." On cue, a fire was lit beneath her. Small, smoldering for now, but she whimpered as she noticed the heat. We both realized in that instant what this was. By now I was screaming things I can't repeat here and slamming my hands against the TV screen as if I could reach through and save her. She bit her lip and acquiesced. Not like she had any room to argue. The host grinned and readied a cue card. "Your first question, where are you, Leela?" "I don't know. How am I supposed to know?" "You do know, Leela. You know exactly where you are." He smirked at her. "Here's a free hint, what is the last thing you remember before you woke up here?" She thought about it and choked back a sob, visibly shaking as the realization slowly settled in. But why? I. The horrible wail of the buzzer cut her off. Ooh, too bad. I am afraid you've run out of time. Seemingly as if on its own, the fire doubled in size. Sparks licked the belly of the bronze bull and began to ever so slowly heat the surface. She pawed around in the tight confines, searching for any reprieve from the scalding heat all around her as the metal grew hot like it'd been left out in the sun on a summer's day. Please. Oh God, let me out of this thing. It hurts. It hurts. The host seemed to breathe in her pain as if stealing a moment's indulgence. Now that there is no doubt about where you are, my dear, let us proceed to the second question. He switched to his next card. Did you believe in God in the end? Oh, of course. She pled her case as if she was being tried in court. My entire life, every day I gave to the poor, helped the sick, did whatever I could to honor High. I am afraid you misunderstood my question. I asked, did you believe in him at the end? The very moment your pitiful little life was snuffed out. I always believed. I'd never forsake him. Yes, yes, I know. You lived a good and holy life, didn't you? He cackled. But what of the very end? You and your little husband were so excited to deliver your first little baby boy. But oh, tragedy. It all went wrong, didn't it? Your precious little boy didn't make it through childbirth and you followed closely behind. That whole business with the botched pregnancy, it was, what do you call it? Ah, yes. A test of fate. And I am afraid you failed. In your final moments, you watched the light fade from your child's eyes and you assumed, wisely in my humble opinion, that no kind and loving God would allow something like that to happen. He laughed. Funny how after a lifetime of dutiful service, all it takes is one little mistake at the end to bring you here. To us. I'd never seen such depths of despair in a person's eyes. Such emptiness. Like with every word, he'd been scooping out another piece of her until she was hollow. And then that buzzer roared again, more shrill than ever, and I could barely see her little window through the smoke and flames. The belly of the bull was turning orange in places, and I could hear her flesh start to sizzle like meat on a grill. There are no words for the noises she made. No words at all. And our last, final question, he continued. What were your last words to your poor, beloved Jackson? I love you. I called out the answer. Bloody fingerprints stained the TV screen from my slamming my hands against it, as I screamed the answer over and over. I love you, I love you, I love you. At some point, I forgot that there was ever a question. I was just screaming it at her as if hoping that she could hear it, that it could bring her a modicum of comfort in that place. The buzzer sounded again. I couldn't bring myself to look. All I could hear was the roaring of the bull and the steam rising from its bronze nostrils. The curtain fell. Silence drowned the sound. The host dropped all pretense that he hadn't been speaking directly to me. Now, Jackson. You just might be one of my new favorite audience members this show had ever had. I know this must have been hard for you. But if you'll just stay tuned, I have one more show I know you're certain to love. I didn't bother to touch the remote. After all, nothing could be worse than what I'd just seen, right? Ron. Horror racked me as the curtain rose and I saw the man chained to a chair. I pulled away like a caveman witnessing fire, cringing and stuttering, face wet with sweat. It was the sort of fear that worked its way into your bones like a bad chill that left you shaking, teeth chattering. It was me. An older me, sure. But not by much. 10 years maybe. A gaunt and hollow version of me, one twisted by 10 years of depression and hard drugs. But it was unmistakable. His eyes widened as he recognized the host. Oh God, God please no. It can't be, oh Christ, let me out of this chair, you. Come now. We wouldn't want to use the Lord's name in vain, would we? I mean, that would be a sin. The host laid a hand on the other me's shoulder. It may have been a few years since you watched our program, but I am sure you remember the rules, don't you, old friend? The other me was wordless, on the verge of hyperventilating, just as I was. The host was giddy with delight. Now, our first and only question is one I am sure our viewer will be very interested in. What sins exactly do you think landed you here? The other me tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. I could see it in his eyes. The years of self-destruction, the bitter hopelessness, the whirlpool of nihilism and vice and decay. The suffocating depths of a man. The darkness. How could he put it into words? The sound of the buzzer was like a pig's squeal. Mame, I am afraid that our viewer is going to have to figure that out for himself. In the meantime, your punishment? Well, we wouldn't want to spoil anything. The curtain slowly began to fall just as a couple other of those black, grotesque monstrosities emerged from the darkness. The curtain covered them all before I could get a good look at their obscene, twisted, asymmetrical figures. All I could hear was the crunching, the sound of skin tearing like paper, the screaming that went on for longer and louder than a human throat or vocal cords could endure. The image and audio were beginning to distort, glitch, burn away. The tapes were physically melting as they played. My VCR was starting to overheat, sparks pouring from its front panel. The host voice jumped around in tone, his voice fading into the static blur as the tapes bubbled and boiled and distorted. But, my friends, I am afraid that concludes tonight's episode of our show. So, with a final farewell to our dear, beloved viewer, Jackson. Just before the image melted away, the camera seemed to jump forward until his face filled the screen, his eyes piercing into mine as he cackled in that sing-song voice. See you soon, Tilda. We called the wrong 911. Hello? Hello? Please, I need help. Jerry grasped his stomach, his face contorted in a grimace of pain. My stomach. I think I have a tummy ache. I unsuccessfully stifled a laugh. Then we were rolling around the basement, hooting and hollering. A couple hours into our smoke session, we couldn't help but try a few harmless prank calls. We exhausted our options of the local restaurants and calling Jerry's cousin with my phone, before we got the brilliant idea to try 911. I was against it. Jerry's argument was we lived in a small town and the operators wouldn't mind a break from the boredom. He won. My tummy. Jerry wailed. He threw his arms above his head, pretending to gasp for air. I cackled, slapping my knee. It really wasn't that funny, but we were zonked out of our minds. Jerry had flung his phone across the room during his exaggerated performance. I stumbled toward it, short bursts of laughter firing from my chest. The call was still connected. No problem, I went to hang up. A woman's voice droned through the speaker. We are sending someone your way. No wait, I brought the phone to my ear. The line disconnected. Damn it. Jerry. He was still writhing on the ground. Jerry, I think they're actually coming. He stopped and craned his neck until he was looking at me upside down. For real? Yes, dude, they said someone's coming. Jerry paused. A confused look passed over his face. But how? We didn't even give them an address. I think they can track that shit now. Cap, he shook his head. No way. That's gotta be illegal. Tracking your location. He looked at me, grasping for validation. It's the police, not some hacker in a Starbucks. Jerry moved quickly towards the TV. And plopped himself down on the couch. Whatever they pull up, we say wrong house. He brought up Netflix. The marijuana in my system soon scrubbed the worry from my thoughts. We sat and enjoyed the show until a dull knock from upstairs interrupted. Jerry jumped from the couch and looked at me wide-eyed. Shit. We were at Jerry's house and both in high school. His parents were out of town for the weekend, but if they heard about this, he could forget about summer break. I didn't think they'd actually come. Shit, hide the weed. Shut up, relax. They'll go away after a while, I said. He was starting to really freak. There weren't any windows, his basement was completely underground. Another knock floated down the stairs. Unable to bring his attention back to the TV. He jumped in the air again. Lights. I left the lights on upstairs. You are an idiot. Jerry's eyes were hot red. In contrast, the situation was sobering me up. I scratched my head roughly. Alright, I think I can talk to them. Stay down here. He thanked me profusely and gave me water to chug for my breath. At the top of the steps I looked back. Jerry gave a thumbs up and waved me on from the bottom. Like he said, the living room lights were on, and through the opaque glass of the front door, two silhouettes. I glanced at my reflection in the mirror and walked nervously toward the front. That moment, with the knob in my hand, I could have made a decision that saved me from the paranoia I've suffered since. Instead, I let them in. The porch lights were off. The glow from the living room burnt uncanny shadows through the screen door onto the faces of the two outside. I waited for them to speak. Soundless and motionless, seemingly refusing to breathe. From each of their shadow-masked faces I could only make out a wide smile with teeth dimly illuminated behind the screen. That silence was far too uncomfortable. I started. Apologies for disturbing you, one interrupted. He sounded young. It caught me off guard. Maybe it was the dark, but their smiles never moved as they talked. There has been an emergency. We are looking for Jerry. Alarm bells started ringing. You might have the wrong house. Sorry, sirs. I moved to close the door. We had never mentioned our real names on the call. Jeremy. That voice sounded familiar. It was enough for me to jump away from the door as if electrocuted. One of the silhouettes outside pressed its face into the screen. Jeremy, come here right now. Mom. Jeremy's voice called limply from the basement. Air evacuated from my lungs. The screen door was opening. With no thoughts in my head beside to flee, to put as much distance between me and the thing coming in, I scrambled up the stairs to the second floor. It was closer than the basement and I locked myself in a bathroom. I started to type out a text to warn Jerry. There were muffled voices from the living room. You must be Jerry. Too late. Yes. Where's my mom? She stepped outside. What seems to be the problem, Jerry? Oh, that was an accident. We bot dialed you, I think. Yes. Your friend. Do you know where he is? I sent a burst of texts to Jerry. Don't trust them. Your mom's not here. Get out. Yeah, I'm not sure. He was supposed to answer the door. Oh. Is everything alright, Jerry? There was a pause. Then Jerry spoke, unsure and slow. Yes. Is it okay if I step out to talk to my mom? She must be really worried. Why, yes. I heard footsteps start before the sounds of a scuffle. Hey. What the hell? There was banging and the sounds of glass shattering. Quiet him. Good. A frantic grunting followed. The initial fear was beginning to dissolve. The urge to save my friend powered my legs. I crept down the stairs painfully, one step at a time, listening to the voices, the silhouettes from the dark, speak over Jerry's feeble cries. I have a rookie here with me today, so please be patient. Halfway down the stairs, the wall ended. The slowest I've ever moved was right then, creeping my head around the edge until half of one eye was clear. They were facing away from me, two men in paramedic uniforms standing over Jerry. He was on the ground bound by straps with bows shoved into his mouth. One of the paramedics with long hair knelt. He ran a hand over Jerry's face, who shook him off and yelped. Give him some monoxide. The long-haired paramedic reached into his bag and began attaching tubes to a gas canister with the big red letters Olorado scrawled across it. Jerry's eyes widened and he began thrashing even harder. He attached the other end to a mask and turned a valve on the canister. A hissing sound filled the room and the gas mask was forced over Jerry's mouth and nose. Hold him. After 30 seconds, Jerry's attempts to free himself noticeably weakened. Within a minute he was unconscious. During all of this I tried to think of someone who could help us. I didn't want to call anyone, afraid they'd hear me from where I was. My parents were asleep. Even if someone was awake, they'd probably call 911. That's what brought them here. Go ahead. Do the assessment. The paramedic directing the long-haired one was short and stocky. He turned the valve and the hissing quieted. He pointed at Jerry, signaling Longhair to continue. Once again, he ran his hands over Jerry's face, then through his hair reaching behind his ears down to his neck. Longhair went over Jerry's entire body, prodding, pushing, and groping every inch of him. When he reached his toes, he turned towards his partner, flashing a grin. Nothing wrong with him. That's terrible news. What was the chief complaint? Abdominal pain. He shook his head. We missed our offering tonight. Young, healthy. This one will make up for it. Bag and tag. You'll learn a lot from him. Longhair nodded and exited the house. The stocky one rummaged through another bag and pulled out a Sharpie. He lifted Jerry's shirt and began drawing a dotted line below the navel. I can't see you. I flinched. Somehow I knew he was talking to me. But I know you're there. I want you to know this isn't any fault of yours. Or his. This, us. You can call it coincidence. Or fate. Whichever you believe. But, believe in it. He capped the Sharpie. The dotted line had become a dotted oval, stretching across Jerry's abdomen and encircling his belly button. We're here to help. Longhair walked back in with a stretcher. They quickly loaded Jerry up. He was still unconscious with the mask on him. Longhair wheeled him out the door and the other called after him. That's where you're going to cut. Get the tools ready. Then he looked into my eye. He smiled. When he spoke, he used Jerry's voice. Does your tummy hurt too? I could barely move but shook my head. Goodbye. When the house was empty, I cried so hard I passed out. In the morning when I woke, I searched the entire house for Jerry for proof that it was all a nightmare. There was no evidence of Jerry or the paramedics. Haven't seen them since. I called the police, the real ones. The story that stuck was I woke up and he was gone. I got a ticket for the weed. That's really it. There was nothing to prove my involvement. Nothing that could prove anything really. Didn't just lose Jerry that day. No one talks to me. Can't even ask for homework answers anymore. All the adults try to hide their conversations about me. Not that I care much. To be honest, I'm still looking for my best friend. A week ago it was late driving home from work. An ambulance pulled up beside me at a stop. Its lights weren't on but I kept my foot on the brake when the traffic light turned green. I tried to get a look inside from the back window but it was too dark to see. Just make sure that it's really an emergency when you dial that number. And if you do, make sure that it's really them. My name is Eve and I'm a survivor of the Adam and Eve project. I wasn't always a psychopath. Neither was Adam. There were 10 of us. 5 Adams and 5 Eves handcuffed together in a room with no doors. When I opened my eyes staring at an unfamiliar ceiling, my name was Eve. I had no other names but Eve. There were 9 bodies spread around me, including a boy, a lump attached to me, curled into a ball. Our real identities were lost, though I could recall small things, tiny splinters still holding on. I saw a dark room filled with twinkling fairy lights, a bookshelf decorated with titles I never read, boxes of prescribed medication sticking from an overflowing trash can. The walls were covered in sticky notes and calendars, a chalkboard bearing a countdown to a date that had long since passed. I thought you were going to cry this time. Why do you make it so hard? The voice was a ghost in my head. She didn't have a name, barely an identity, but my heart knew her. She existed as a shadow right in the back of my mind, suppressed deep down. With her, I remembered the rain soaking my face and my pounding footsteps through dirt. When I tried to dive deeper inside these splinters, I hit a wall. It should have confused me, angered me, but I couldn't feel anger. There was only a sense of melancholy that I had lost someone close to me. With no proper memories though, I didn't feel sad. I wasn't the first one awake. There were others, but neither of us spoke, trapped inside our own minds. Drawing my knees to my chest, I wondered what the others were feeling and thinking. Did they have loved ones they couldn't fully remember? I did know one thing. There was something wrong with my body, the bones in my knees cracking when I moved them. Everything felt stiff and wrong, my neck giving a satisfying popping noise when I tipped my head left to right. The room was made of glass. 4 glass walls casting 4 different versions of me. It was like looking into a fun mirror, each variant of me growing progressively more contorted, a monster blinking back. There was a metal thing wrapped around my wrist and when I tugged it, the lump next to me groaned. I noticed the handcuff and the lump when I was half awake. But I thought I was hallucinating. The lump had breath that smelled of garlic coffee and he snored. Adam, my mind told me. The lump's name was Adam. Everything about me felt new. Like a blank slate. I had no real thoughts or memories. The boy attached to me was different from the others. Adam was dressed in the same bland clothes, but his hat collar, a single streak of bright red stained his shirt. I found myself poking it and he leaned back, his eyes widening. The red was dry, ingrained into the material. Which meant at some point, Adam had been bleeding. Not a lot, and he didn't look like he had any wounds. I studied him. I guess we studied each other. He was a weary brunette with freckles and 0 flaws, like his face had been airbrushed. This wasn't the natural kind of airbrush. I could see where someone or something had attempted to scrape away his freckles too, the skin of his left cheek a raw pinkish color. I wasn't a stranger to this thing either. I could see where several spots on my face had been surgically removed. The boy glued to my side was an enigma in a room drowned of color. The red on him made him stand out in a sea of white, a mystery I immediately wanted to solve. I couldn't help it, prodding the guy's face, running my finger down his cheek and stabbing my nail under his nose for signs of bleeding. I was curious, and curiosity didn't belong in the white room full of blank slates. I wondered if the old me looked for that kind of thing. Her bookshelf was full of horror and crime thriller, an entire box set of a detective series my mind wasn't allowed to remember. There was that wall again, this time slamming down firmly on the room with the fairy lights. There was too much of me in my fragmented memory, the girl who wasn't Eve. I wasn't fully aware that I was violently prodding Adam until he wafted my hand away. The boy opened his mouth to speak, his eyes narrowing with irritation, before his mind reminded him that irritation did not exist in the white room. I watched the anger in his eyes fizzle out and he frowned at me, adapting the expression of a baby deer. I think he was trying to be angry, trying to yell at me. When I realized he couldn't swear or didn't know how to swear, he distanced himself from me, turning his back and folding his arms. I got the hint, shuffling away, only for the handcuffs to violently snap us back together. This is a recorded message stated by the United States government on 8/27, 2023 regarding the Adam and Eve project. Please listen carefully. This message will not be repeated. A text-to-speech voice drew my attention to the ceiling, and next to me Adam let out a quiet hiss. You have been unconscious for 35 days and 16 hours following awakening. It is recommended that you remain where you are. The voice was pre-recorded, but it definitely sounded aimed toward the Adam who was crawling towards a door that looked like a wall, but I could see the subtle glint of a handle. 200 years ago, on April 5, 2023, NASA announced the discovery of Bluesky, a potentially hazardous near-Earth object was estimated to miss our planet, flying by at just kilometers. 200 years ago. The robot's voice wasn't fully registering in my brain. The text-to-speech voice paused and a screen lit up in front of us displaying Bluesky and then flickering to several news screens. CBS, NBC, Fox News and BBC, all with red banners and panicked-looking presenters. However, during its passing, the Bluesky asteroid's collision course changed, striking our planet on April 13, 2023, causing global destruction and a Massachusetts extinction event. A screen showed us the entirety of the West Coast underwater. New York, London, Seoul, Tokyo, all of them. Either wiped from the map or uninhabitable. Wait. I wasn't expecting Adam to speak, his voice more of a croak. His eyes widened, like he was remembering who he was before Adam. That's Apophis. He scratched the back of his head. Adam's random declaration of words and numbers intrigued me. I inclined my head, motioning for him to continue, but he just shot me a look. Adam was a lot better at emotions than me. What? You said something. My own voice was a static whisper. He blinked, narrowing his eyes. No, I didn't. Turning away from the boy, I decided to ignore him and all of his future declarations. I should have been terrified, mourning the loss of not just my loved ones but my entire planet. But I didn't have any memories of the world except the rain and a dark bedroom filled with fairy lights. I could have been a traveler, visiting every country and documenting each one. All of that had been taken away, and yet I couldn't feel sad or betrayed. Why would I mourn a planet I didn't remember? Please listen carefully. The voice continued. You have been carefully selected in a choosing process for the Adam and Eve program. Humanity's last chance of survival. 200 years ago, you were cryogenically frozen in an attempt to restart in a new world. Presently for you, the Earth is estimated to be habitable. When the lights flickered off, the screen lit up, displaying exactly what the voice said. A new world and the bluest sky stretching out across a never-ending horizon. I found myself transfixed, smiling dazedly at brand new oceans and newly formed continents. We asked this, the message crackled. On behalf of the President of the United States, will you do what we couldn't? Will you make the new world a better place? Will you fix the mistakes of your predecessors and restart our sick world? I heard my reply before I was aware of the word in my mouth. Yes. The screen was brighter, that beautiful blue sky so hard to look away from. Will you create humans you are proud of? Yes. Yes. Adam's murmur followed mine, the others echoing. Will you be our future hope? Will you destroy every human being who goes against the new earth and spill blood in the name of Adam and Eve? Yes. The room flooded with light and I blinked rapidly, drool seeping down my chin. It was the voice's next words that tore away my mind. It is with great displeasure, however, that we must inform you there are limited resources in our stockpile. The ceiling opened up, a large ratty bag dropping onto the ground. It was a brand new color, but this time, a moldy green. Something snapped in two inside my mind. It didn't belong in the new world. It was poison from our predecessors. I backed away with the others, yanking Adam with me. At first he didn't move, cross-legged, a smile stretched across his lips. I don't think he noticed the bag. He was starry-eyed and blinking at the screen still filled with the new world. Our new world. That was ours to mold into our own. There is no need for panic, the voice said. Consider this bag an artifact of the lost world. There is nothing to fear. Fear. I wasn't sure I knew what that was. Did my old self feel fear running through the rain? Did I feel fear witnessing my planet burn right in front of me? There can only be one Adam and one Eve in the new world. The voice continued. Please choose among yourselves. You have 2 minutes. I didn't experience fear when the tranquility in the white room dissolved. Adam violently pulled me to my feet when an Eve with a blonde bob dove inside the bag and pulled out a gun. She shouldn't have been able to use it. Our memories were gone, our old selves' footprints in the sand. But it was the way her fingers expertly wrapped around the butt that made me think otherwise. The Eve didn't hesitate and with perfect aim, blew the heads off of 2 Adams and then another Eve. I watched more color splatter and pool and stain the white room, bodies falling like dominoes. When an Eve stepped toward me, my Adam pulled me across the room, dipped into the bag, his fingers wrapped around a machete. He threw me a gun and another Adam dived for it. Still no fear. I ducked and grabbed it, my hands working for me, shooting the Adam between the eyes. I realized what we needed to do to survive. But it wasn't fear that made me kill. It was necessary for the new Earth. The words were in my head, suffocating my thoughts. We had limited resources. There was no screaming, no crying, or begging. An Eve knocked me onto my face, but there was no pain. She kicked me in the head, plunging her knife into the back of my leg. Still no pain. Blood stained me, running down my chin. No pain. I didn't think, I just acted. One Adam and Eve left and they were hardest to take down. The Eve circled me, eyes narrowed, calculating my every move. Adam and I communicated through nods and head gestures. Adam told me to go for the sandy-haired Adam, while he would take a swipe at an Eve. I was taken off guard when the Adam surrendered, only to kick me onto my back, knocking Adam off balance too. I thought we were going to die. But my Adam had been following and predicting their every move. Back to back, I reached for my gun. 2 bullets left. I managed to get Eve straight through her left eye. I didn't notice we were the only ones left until the walls were stained red, my hands coated with Adams and Eves, and the final Adam was lying in a stemming pool of blood. I had pieces of skull stuck in my hair and I was out of breath, but I felt a sense of triumph. There was so much blood, but it was the blood of the old world. Both of us knew that. Adam turned to me, his eyes filled with stars, his skin stained red. I thought he was going to hug me, but his gaze found the screen where our new world awaited us. The 2 of us were breathless, awaiting the next instructions. But none came. I counted hours and then a full day. Adam had gotten progressively less appealing the longer I stayed isolated with him. He sat against the wall with his knees to his chest, head of matted curls against the wall, the 2 of us suffocating in the stink from the slow decomposition around us. The other Adams and Eves were in their first stage. Bloating. How did I know that? Adam kept muttering to himself over and over again. It was the same number, repeatedly. I couldn't feel anger or irritable, but I was confused why he was saying it. Another day went by and I was starting to feel deeply suppressed hunger start to bleed through. I watched Adam counting to himself, his eyes closed, feet tapping on the floor, and wondered if the new world would accept cannibalism. Adam stared at himself in the fun mirror a lot, making noises with his mouth. I wasn't fully concentrating when he turned to me, blurting, "How big was Apophis again?" To me his words were alien and I ignored him. But then he started talking again, spewing random words. Huntley Diving Center. Med School. Cheese Sandwich. Man with a bald head. When I told him to stop, he continued. Van. Cheese Sandwich. Pretty Little Liars. He knocked his head against the wall. Professor Jacobs told me to go, but I didn't want to go. I told him I'd call the cops and then I'm seeing silver. Adam. I said. Stop. Bad news, he whispered. Very bad news, I'm not allowed to tell anyone. Adam. I think I was irritated. Adam sighed, closing his eyes. United States, Canada, Mexico, Panama, Haiti, Jamaica, Peru. His gaze tracked the screen in front of us. Republic Dominican, Cuba, Caribbean, Greenland, El Salvador too. Asterisk we found them. An Adam's voice, a human voice, ripped me from slumber. Over here. Thundering footsteps followed and something in my gut twisted. I stood up, swaying. Adam followed, half-lidded eyes barely finding mine. His expression was new. I think mine was too. Fear. Humans. Before I knew what was happening, I was being grabbed by masked men who were surprisingly gentle. Humans. I didn't know what to say. I asked them how they survived the asteroid impact and they told me to stay calm. Adam was behind me, his arms pinned behind his back. He was being told to stay calm, but Adam was calm. He may have been nodding along to the humaness words, but he was thinking exactly what I was. When Eve cupped my cheeks and asked if I was okay, my gaze flicked to my discarded gun. Olivia. She was yelling in my face. Sweetie, you're in shock. Can you tell me how many fingers I am holding up? I nodded dizzily, unable to tear my gaze from my weapon. 5. There could only be one Adam and one Eve. I felt fear for the first time when Adam and I were led through large silver doors and into blinding sunlight. When it faded and my eyes found clarity, I wasn't seeing breathtaking views of mountains and newly formed oceans. Across the road, a woman was walking her dog. A school bus flew past, then an ambulance, a long line of traffic snaking down the road. I could smell Chinese food, my mouth watering. When Adam started screaming, my fear came back, and it was enough to unravel me completely, sending me to my knees. I was still stained in blood, wrapped in a blanket I could barely feel. My mind that had been ripped apart, that had splintered for the good of our humanity, was starting to crumble. Humanity didn't need fucking saving. It only truly hit me when I was sitting in the back of a cop car, Adam in the front seat, that I wasn't a last savior of our species. The Earth was still spinning, still alive in modern day 2023, and I was just Eve. The Eve who sat next to me in the back of the car, gently rubbing my hands, told me my name was Olivia. I was a 24-year-old student and I had been missing for 3 years. Adam's name was Kai. He was 23 and a med student. No, we were Adam and Eve. I spent a while in another white room, but this time I wasn't forced to kill people. I was told I had been through brutal torture I could not remember. I told her that was impossible, and then she calmly showed me my legs and arms. I was covered in burns, old and new bruises, my body sliced open and stitched up. With this abuse, my kidnappers had successfully turned me into a shell of myself. I was asked if I wanted therapy to revisit those memories, but I declined. I was happy being Eve, even if it was just for a while. I saw Adam several times, but he was never fully conscious, either strapped to a bed, muttering to himself, or cross-legged on the floor, head tipped back. I was 2 months into my treatment when he barged into my room. Adam said, his words slurring. Is when Apophis is going to hit us? I nodded slowly, dropping the book I was reading. My re-education was going well. I was getting my emotions back. Which, of course, included annoyance. It's going to miss us. Think. Adam hissed, pressing his finger to his lips. Gotta be quiet. Chaff. Shutting the door painfully slowly like he was in a cartoon skit, Adam stumbled over to my bed, prodding at his neck. They stabbed me, he said in a manic giggle, but I'm not stupid. I'm smart. I'm like so smart, and it's been driving me crazy, but now I see it. Adam leaned forward. Apophis. 2029, he said, his breath tickling my cheek. Is why we were taken. He burst out laughing. Can't you see? April. 2029. Miles. A big lump of space rock going zoom. He stopped laughing, slamming his fist into his palm. Impact. Bang. Adam's eyes widened, his expression crumpling. Help me. He whispered before crumpling into a heap and then dragged out by several EVs in white. According to them, he was experiencing mild side effects from treatment. Unlike me, Adam chose to get his memories back. Yeah, that's not a good idea. Olivia's mind was too much, too painful. My old life started to seep back in the form of loved ones as I was slowly deconditioned. I stopped referring to boys and girls and Adams and Eves, and was firmly told the new Earth was just fantasy, all of the destruction I saw generated with AI. I have a girlfriend who visited me every day. She said I didn't have to take the therapy, but I know she wants me to remember Olivia. Her name is Charlie, and when I was released from the White Room, she took me back to our shared house. I have 2 roommates. Sam and Matt. Both of them kept their distance for a while, especially when I accidentally referred to them as Adams. I'm still getting letters from the facility politely inviting me for a therapy session. I am ignoring them, but I have started seeing a single black van outside our house. I think my kidnappers are back and I'm terrified. The facility told me to call them as soon as I see anyone suspicious. I've told Charlie and the guys to hide upstairs, and right now I'm in our living room. It's pitch black outside, but I can see a figure standing directly outside our house. I've turned off all the lights. Every time I blink, I swear they're getting closer. I think whoever wants a new world has come back for me. I discovered why my barber cuts my hair for free. Mr. Fascal has cut my hair since I moved to the city about 3 years ago. He is an older guy, maybe 50s or 60s, and he possesses that look and drawl that makes me think he's from up north somewhere. He could be from New York, Maine, or even the Great Lakes area, but I never asked him where. He is not a big guy, maybe $1.20 in the rain, and he cuts my hair just the way I like it. High and tight on the sides, leave some on top so whoever I am sleeping with has something to play with, and neaten up my sideburns. I can grow a real beard, or he'd probably trim that for me too. The best part is that he does it all for free. Hard to believe, I know, but it seems there was a cost after all. Our relationship started easily enough. I had an interview with the city, maintenance and custodial, and I wanted to look sharp and make a good impression. Everything other than that paid nothing or barely nothing, and I really wanted to lock this job down. I had a nice set of interview clothes, some comfortable business shoes, and a winning smile, and I needed a sharp haircut to seal the deal. That is where the problem lies. My hair grows abnormally fast. It always has, and when I was a kid my dad used to bemoan the fact. He made jokes about going to barber school or buying stock in master cuts, but he always understood that when it was time for a cut, it was time for a cut. If you let it go longer than 2 weeks without a cut, it just turns into a shapeless Massachusetts. By the end of week 3, I looked like a sheepdog, and Dad would look over his paper and sigh before saying he would take me to the barber. Fascal's Hair and Beards was about a block from my house, and when I stuck my head in to see their prices, Mr. Fascal looked up and smiled at me over the pile of hair he was sweeping up. Then suddenly, he took a deep breath, and when he opened his eyes again I asked if everything was okay. Just fine, young man. Say, you look like a man in need of a haircut, am I right? I told him he sure was, and he invited me in and told me to have a seat. He had about 1,000,000 questions on that first visit. No, I didn't usually let it get this long. I liked it this way, but a little long on top. No, I didn't use any special shampoo, just dandruff shampoo from the Dollar General. No, I wasn't really prone to dry scalp, but a fella can never be too careful. On and on and on and on until, finally, it was done. He had cut it just right, the perfect length, the perfect fade, everything. I asked him what I owed him, and he told me it was free. Come on, I said, you gotta charge me something. I let my customers pay what they can afford, he said, so whatever you can afford is fine with me. Think of it as a tip. I was okay with it and walked out with a free haircut while Mr. Fascal waved me out with a $10 tip. I left with a spring in my step. I felt like a new man, and I was ready for the job interview. I went home, got a shower, and when I looked in the mirror I knew I had this. The next time I went to see Mr. Fascal, I left him a $20 tip and told him it was all thanks to him that I had gotten my awesome new job. For the next couple of years I always went to Mr. Fascal when I needed a cut. If I had a date coming up, I went to Fascal's. Promotion interview at work? Fascal's. I told friends about his shop. I went there just to get a touch up and talk with the old fella. In no time at all, Mr. Fascal and I were friends. He liked the same sports team I did, watched a lot of the same movies and TV shows I did, and even liked a lot of the same classic rock that I did. It was great, and I always looked forward to my bi-monthly haircut. Then, about 2 months ago, it all changed. I had come in to get my bi-monthly cut, telling Mr. Fascal about the previous week as he cut and styled my hair. He was always meticulous, getting everything just right as he cut and trimmed, and when he turned me around to look into the mirror, it was the same way I had gotten it for the last 3 years. I thanked him, handed him $10, and told him I'd see him soon. Of course, Mr. Fascal said, sweeping up the hair, come back anytime. I was leaving, almost a block up the street, when I realized I didn't have my sunglasses. They were my brand new Oakleys, and they had cost quite a bit of cash. I remembered having them when I came up, taking them off my head and setting them down at the station Mr. Fascal used. No problem, I thought, I'll just go back and get them. I stepped in, saying I had forgotten my sunglasses and was just gonna grab them, and that's when I saw him. Mr. Fascal was looking up guiltily, his eyes panicked. He was down on all fours, eating the hair he had swept up off the ground like he was a cow in the field. When he turned, I could see pieces of hair sticking to his lip like accusations. He stood up, whipping himself off, brushing at his mouth as he tried to explain. I know how this looks, and I'll admit that yes, I was eating your hair. But you have to understand, your hair is what I look forward to. I don't eat just anyone's hair, well, I used to. Now I can't wait to see you come in so I can eat something good. Why are you looking at me like that? I am not crazy. I am not crazy, he shouted, getting up as he stalked toward me. He seemed to realize that saying that made him sound crazy, so he switched gears. Haven't I always done good work for you? There's nowhere in this town that you would get a haircut for less than $25. I cut your hair for tips. I've cut your hair for the dollars in your pocket. I've been good to you, and you've been a good customer. Let's just pretend this never happened, okay? Let us just go back to, but I didn't hear the rest. I snatched up my sunglasses and was out the door before he could say another word. I spent a while thinking about that, and the more I processed it, the worse it seemed to get. It began to haunt my dreams, seeing him bent over and eating the hair straight off the floor, looking back at me and grinning with my hair in his teeth, and I would wake up in a cold sweat. I know it's not a particularly scary thing, but it freaked the hell out of me. I don't really like it when people put hair in their mouths. I had a girl in elementary school who used to chew her pigtails, and it bred a lifetime phobia in me. Just the thought of wet hair in someone's mouth makes me want to puke, and I can't even touch someone's hair without cringing if they have a wig. A weird collection of phobias, but they remain. It only took a couple of weeks before I started seeing new growth. My hair just grows too fast, and after 3 weeks my boss commented that I was looking shabby. He handed me a 20 out of his own wallet and told me to get a trim over lunch. I took it and started looking for somewhere to get a trim. The city had quite a few shops, but it seemed like whenever I was in one, I caught someone looking at me out of the corner of my eye. It was never anything I could prove, just a feeling, and when I looked up, I could almost catch a glimpse of Mr. Fascal. He was gone when I looked, but it made me extremely paranoid. I became aware of more than a glimpse as the weeks went on. When I rode the bus to work, I caught the familiar deep inhale of someone smelling my hair. When I was standing in a lunch line, I felt my hair move as someone inhaled. When I was at Walmart buying groceries, someone actually touched my hair, but they were gone when I turned around. It led me to become something of a recluse, and I only left the house to go to work. Over time, my hair grew out and I decided I would have to get another cut. I went to bed, setting my alarm so I could get up early enough to get to the master cuts down on Bonnie. It was Saturday, I had the day off, and I had chores to do before I got to the business of relaxing. As I slipped off to sleep, I fell into a familiar dream, a dream that had plagued me for weeks. I was sitting in the barber chair at Mr. Fascal's, the cape falling around me like a spider web, and the old man asking me if it was too tight. I didn't say anything, I was too scared to speak, and as the scissors began to clip, I trembled in fear. I didn't dare look back at the old man. I just knew his real face would be replaced by a monstrous visage, and I would wake up panting and looking around for nothing at all. When the alarm went off, I went to the bathroom to splash some water on my face and start the shower. My bare shoulder itched, and when I went to wipe it off, I noticed there was hair clinging to my sweaty hand. Not a lot, just leavings. Like the leavings you find after a haircut. I ran to the bathroom and found that my hair was cut just the way I liked it. The sides were high and tight, the top was manageable but still thick, and my bangs were perfect. Everything was just as it usually was, and I felt a cold chill run through me that had nothing to do with air conditioning. I called the landlord, had the locks changed, and reported to the police that someone had broken into my house and cut my hair. The police didn't really take it seriously. They made jokes about a midnight barber and asked if I'd left a tip under my pillow. I told them about Mr. Fascal, but when I gave them the address, they just shook their heads and walked away. They thought I was joking with them, they didn't believe a word of what I told them, and as I ran the shower, I remember sitting under the water for a very long time and just letting it run over me. The bits of hair flowing down the drain felt like a betrayal. 2 weeks later, I woke up with another fresh haircut. I called the police, but they rolled their eyes and told me to calm down. I told them it was hard for me to calm down when someone was breaking into my house and cutting my hair. I demanded they go check on Mr. Fascal and told them right where his shop was, but they looked less amused this time at the suggestion. I asked if they had been to talk to him yet and told them he had been there for 3 years, but they just told me it hadn't been funny the first time and it wasn't funny now. Why would it be funny? I asked, having to stop myself from grabbing one of them. Because Fascal's has never been open. It was a prop for the city's revitalization project, like cauliflowers across the street from it, a green butcher beside it. It has set dressing, it has never opened. Mr. Fascal was a guy who owned a barber shop in the 20s. He is dead, there is no Fascal who cuts hair. They left, and that left me very rattled. Mr. Fascal isn't a ghost, I know that. I have friends who go to him. I have felt him touch me. He has flesh and blood, just like I am sure of it. The fact that he eats hair is incidental. The man is real. But if he isn't Mr. Fascal, then who is he? How does he keep breaking into my house? I have a window in my room, but it's barred with a piece of broom handle and I live on the 3rd floor. I changed the locks again, I wedged a chair under my door, and when I finally made myself calm down enough to sleep, I hoped it would end. I woke up completely bald. Not buzzed, not at a 0 guard, but bald. Like someone shaved my head in my sleep and took the hair. They got my eyebrows too, my 5 o'clock shadow and my thick sideburns. I was as smooth and hairless as a newborn baby. I don't know what to do. I can call the cops, they won't believe me. I can call the landlord, he has replaced the locks twice now and is getting angry about it. I can afford to move, I can leave my job, I am stuck. What I did find, however, was a message left on my nightstand. I am sure the cops will say that I wrote it, but I know I didn't. There's hair on it and it's written in a heavy hand like a kid's scribblings. It has done on the back of an ad for Fascal's hair and beards, and the implication was pretty obvious. Come see me when it grows back. If you don't see, it makes no difference. I know where to find you. I think my son has lived my life before. He told me my future and I am terrified. Let me just start by saying my 6-year-old son and I are very close. From an extremely young age, he has been able to sympathize with me and has been extremely emotionally intelligent. The thing is, it is not with everyone. It is just me. He feels like just a regular boy with everyone else, but he always knows what to say when I am having a hard day. I try not to show it, but he somehow knows. Emotional intelligence is how I've always played it off. But now, I am not so sure anymore. Since my son could talk and form sentences, he has said things to me that he should have no way of knowing. It started out with him saying things like, "Mommy, don't worry. I still think you are pretty." The day I was really struggling with my body image. I put on a few pounds and hated myself. Of course, I didn't let my son see me crying in the mirror or grabbing the rolls on my stomach. I mean, little boys always think their mother is beautiful. Right? It is not like he knew. Soon after that, he mentioned to me that he missed Bethany. I asked him who Bethany was and he looked at me like I was crazy. He told me it was his sister who died. My son never had a sister. However, I had a sister who died at 16 whose name was Bethany. I never mentioned it to him. I thought maybe it was a fluke. Next, I lost my job. Once again, he had no clue it happened. I was reading him a bedtime story and he put his hand over the book and looked up at me. He got a serious look on his face and said, "It'll be okay. You'll find a job next week and it'll pay better too." It felt weird that he found out about the job loss, but I didn't think much about it. Once I did in fact get a job next week that also paid better, I was weirded out. I asked my mother about it and she said it is probably just the close bond that a mom and son always have. Kids are weird. Every parent has their own story of a time when their kid said something terrifying to them. She tried to explain to me. A few months ago, it started to become an everyday thing where he would say something about a subject he shouldn't know. Then about a month ago, it went from him knowing things he shouldn't to him saying things like, "I remember when I was a girl and I loved the color purple. I remember when I was a mommy and I cried a lot. I remember when I was a mommy and I wanted to run away." This felt weird to me. It wasn't like he thought he was a girl. I asked him once why he thought he was a girl. He looked at me frustrated and said, "I am not a girl now. I was a girl before I was a boy." He kept telling me stories of all the things he did when he was a girl. He would tell me things about myself that I've never told anybody. Even my husband. When I told my husband I was starting to get scared of my son, he said I was being dramatic. I guess it doesn't help my case that I didn't tell my husband everything my son said to me. When he said things like missing his dead sister, that was one thing. But, well, let us just say I've not always been a saintly woman. I have a past. I mean, we have all done things we aren't proud of, but my husband doesn't know about these things. First of all, I stole a lot as a teenager. Nothing too crazy. I think a lot of teenagers do that, honestly. The more serious things I kept from him are, I got a DUI in college, my ex has a restraining order over me, I was a stripper for several years, and worst of all, I cheated on my husband a few years ago. It was dumb and I regret it. But I will never tell him. My son had mentioned doing all these things when he was a girl or when he was a mommy. Of course in child terms, but nonetheless he described all those things. He hasn't mentioned much to anyone else. Mostly just me. He hasn't come right out and said that he was me or anything. If he were me, maybe he doesn't realize it. Maybe he just has random, fuzzy memories of another life. Last week I noticed he seemed down. He wasn't really talking like he normally does. I felt like a terrible mother. I was thankful he wasn't talking. It felt like every time I talked to him, I got more and more scared of him. One day he crawled into my bed with me in the morning. He took a deep sigh and looked at me. I remember when I was a mommy and that car hurt me tomorrow. My heart sank and I didn't even know what to say, but I mustered up the courage. Honey, what is going to happen to me tomorrow? I said while pushing away the hair falling in his face as a nervous tick. I remember it hurting so bad. I don't want you to feel the pain too. Don't go. Don't do it. I sat looking him deep in his eyes. My bed, which felt so warm and comforting a few minutes ago, now felt cold and hard. What was going to happen to me? I kept asking him what was going to happen to me. Every time I asked, he got more and more upset. My husband woke up after I asked him for the 5th time. He got so mad at me. I can't blame him. I was clutching our son's shoulders and screaming. Tell me. Tell me. I said over and over and over again. My son didn't talk to me for the rest of the day. The next day, I tried to explain to my husband what our son said and how I was scared. Because this was the first time my husband heard of my son saying such crazy things, he didn't believe I was in danger. We had dinner plans with some friends that night. It was the last thing I wanted to do. I figured since my son mentioned a car, I needed to just stay away from them at all costs. I tried to convince my husband I was sick, but he, of course, didn't believe me. I should have said I was sick from the very beginning and not told him the real reason for wanting to stay home. My son's babysitter made it to the house. As we said our goodnights to our boy, he gave me a sad hug. Not only that, but he couldn't take his eyes off my left hand. After our hug, he grabbed my fingers and squeezed them tightly. I knew something was about to happen to my hand. I felt like I could anticipate the pain. We walked out the door and my husband guided me to the car door. He opened it up and helped me in. Although it didn't feel like he was trying to be a gentleman, it felt like he was scared that I was going to run. He wasn't wrong. After a few minutes of driving, I felt the anxiety building. I felt sick. At a stoplight, I noticed the car door was unlocked. I slipped off my heels and opened the car door. I was trying to move way faster than my feet could take me. I didn't see the curb and tripped over. Face planting in the process. My husband came running over to help me up. I thought he would be mad that I tried to run away. I thought he would call me a brat or worse. But he didn't. He could see how scared I was. He realized it didn't matter if what I was feeling was real or not. But he needed to respect my fear and worry. He tried to help me back into the car. He said we would go back home, but I refused to go in the car. I told him we had to walk. This is when he started to get frustrated. He felt like he did his best to compromise and emphasize with my anxieties, but he wasn't willing to walk 2 miles home in 40-degree weather at 7 p.m. Looking back, I understand why he was so annoyed. He grabbed my shoulders and took a deep breath. He started nudging me back to the car. The nudging turned into pushing and the pushing turned into forcing. I was pushing back and doing everything in my power to not go into the car. I was kicking and screaming. A few other cars pulled over to help. I am sure they were thinking something much worse was actually happening. Before anyone could get to me, he got me into the car. As he was slamming the door, I reached out my hand to try and stop it. The next few minutes were so fuzzy. I could feel my hand pulsing. I could vaguely hear my husband screaming and apologizing profusely. Followed by strangers separating us and trying to help. An ambulance showed up a few minutes later, and that's when I noticed my hand. My index, middle, and ring fingers had been smashed in the car door. Half of my middle finger was completely gone. We went to the ER and about 80% of my fingers were saved, luckily. If it wasn't obvious, my husband felt terrible. Not only for what happened to my fingers but for being so aggressive with me and not listening to me. I know I should be been more bothered, but I have other family members I am more worried about. After that, I accepted that I needed to take what my son said about my future seriously. That week, he said more disturbing things. I remember when I was a mommy and I set the house on fire. I remember when I was a mommy and I stabbed my husband. I remember when I was a mommy and the scary man took me into the forest. I remember when I was a mommy and the monster from the closet hurt me. I was terrified of the things that would happen to me. I know children can't always describe or articulate words that well at a young age, but that didn't help me feel any better. I tried to ask him for details of what he meant, but once he said something, he usually didn't want to talk about it anymore. Especially if it seemed to be traumatizing. It's like the memory would flash in his head and it had to blurt it out. The reason I am writing all this out in the first place is because of what he told me today. The two of us were coloring at the kitchen table, and without even looking up at me, he said, "I remember when I was a mommy and my son killed me." I froze in fear. I couldn't believe the chill that ran down my spine. And the fact that he didn't seem fazed by it at all. He just kept coloring his pirate ship. I need help. What the heck am I supposed to do? I don't even know how to process any of this. I don't believe in reincarnation or anything like that. Even if I did, is that even how it works? There shouldn't be an overlap in lives like this, right? But how else is something like this explained? It's not like my kid can just see the past and future. He has seen my whole life before. And from his perspective, he doesn't find it strange that my life used to be his. He is also aware enough to recognize a memory, like when I lost my job, and he comforted me knowing that I'll get a new job soon. This whole thing is hurting my brain. I love my son, but I am so terrified and feel crazy. Someone, please help me. I don't know what to do. There is a customer none of us are allowed to serve. I work at the Lone Star Diner off the road from Carson City to Reno. Diner name has of course been changed for obvious reasons, more on that later. Why do I work at the Lone Star Diner off the road from Carson City to Reno? Well, because, kind stranger, my life plans didn't work out. Generally, if you recall working at a diner past college, specifically, one in the middle of nowhere, it might mean that things aren't going so hot. But still, why this diner? Why Lone Star specifically? I am aware you probably aren't actually asking these questions, but I nonetheless believe they deserve a response. Of all of the diners in the world, what makes Lone Star so special is the pay. The pay is fucking great. There are maybe 10 other diners within a 30-minute drive from where I live. Most of them average out to a little over minimum wage. Meanwhile, Lone Star is whipping up a mean $1.50 slasher. And that hourly rate is due to one single, solitary reason, no matter what anyone tells you. Because of him. My first day on the job was fine, more or less. I'd worked customer service before, so I felt like I could run with the strange surprises that came unique to diners. I was able to adapt to the inconsistency of the rules pretty quickly. Unwritten rules like some areas in the restaurant need to be spotless at all times, others boss lady couldn't give less of a shit about. Serve customers quickly. But not too quickly, asshole. Customers here don't actually like it when you show up too fast. Give them some time to feel the floor under their boots, to miserably stare ahead and mourn what could be been. Why no diner stuff? They here because they want to be alone. Pardon the contradiction. Of course, vaguely defined, whispered only by ghosts, rules extended to the cooks as well. If you were, somehow, secretly, celebrity chef Marco Pierre White in the flesh, your mandate was to keep your damn prowess to yourself. Your job is to make the classics as decently as possible. Not bad, but not amazing. Just poor enough to be really good, that's what the customers are here for. As the weeks unfolded, I rose, or I suppose crouched to the occasion quite well. You want intentional, pinpoint precision mediocrity? You've come to the right person. Most of the patrons just wanted coffee and brunch, brought to them at medium speed, with a semi-predictable cadence of waiter or waitress check-ins afterwards. Done, done, and done. Not one for subtlety. One day I finally decided to ask my boss the question in the middle of a shift. I didn't want to ruin a good thing by doubting it, but fuck me if I wasn't a little curious. Not a full look at the gift horse's mouth, more of a skeptical side-eye. Why $1.50 slasher? She didn't even look up from her task at the register, methodically counting out bills. Said it on your first day, ya gotta be good at following the rules. And when it is an important rule, you'd better be damn well perfect. High expectations here. I made a face. Right. High expectations. You think I am joking? No, I am, I guess. Why did I even speak up? I just think you're running a really cool operation here. Cooler than you might realize. It has still work, but the whole thing seems fair. Christ, my waffling skills were abysmal. Add that to the list of intentional mediocrity. Boo. She looked up from her duties and shot me a stern look. I don't run this ship. And following the rules here means that you take care of yourself. I am sorry. I am your employer, sure, and I'll pay you well to be here, sure, but you should be aware there is plenty more going on here than just you in this diner. She glanced down at her watch, then sighed. I usually save this speech for the end of the month, but you already caught me halfway through it. So, the Cole's notes, if you don't think you have it in you to follow instructions clearly, without protest and without asking too many questions, then you should leave. Quit. No harm, no foul. A week's worth of pay on the house. The conversation sputtered shortly after that. I tried to find an opening to ask more about what she meant, but she was closed off to the topic moving forward. And you know what? That was fine. If she wanted me to put my head down and just do the work, I could do that. And work I did. And things were good. Mundane small talk with the customers was fun, my coworkers were friendly, and I was getting paid well. I'd found a place to park the failures of my life. A place to build from. It must have been a Saturday, I think, when I first noticed him. An occupied seat in the far corner of the diner. No idea how long he'd been sitting there and waiting, though he certainly looked patient. I had the strange inkling that he'd been left hanging for quite some time, though I couldn't actually remember seeing him enter. Brown corduroy shirt. Short hair. Mid-50s it seemed. A reasonably calm smile. Normal looking dude. I started making my way out from the back and headed towards him. Immediately I felt a tight grip on my arm. It was Melanie, my boss, with a forceful clutch enough to make me drop my notepad. Her fingers tightened around my forearm, sharply pinching my skin. Important rules, she said. What? You remember our chat about rules? Well, this is the most important one. Okay. Okay. That man over there in the corner. She motioned to the man who had caught my attention sitting upright, hands softly clasped together, coy smile across his face. You don't go up to him. You don't say a word to him. But he is a customer. Her hold intensified. She was hurting me. Almost as if she was taking out some sort of unseen anger on me. I'd like to ask you right now to be smart enough to not ask questions and just follow instructions. You don't go to his table, you don't talk to him. You can look at him. You can shout across the room at him if you like, though I can't imagine why you'd ever need to do that. But you do not approach him, and you do not take his order. A sharp exhale through the nose, a shake of the head, and a glare from my manager. It is different every time. But it ain't pretty. I watched him from the short distance I'd been afforded. It was hard not to. She did too. Unlike the other customers here, I didn't get a sense that he was here to be alone, to reminisce, or to take part in the comfort ritual of a lackluster Eggs Benedict over rack. Instead, I had the sense that he was just curious. Mild-mannered, content, but curious. My shift ended not too long after, so I didn't actually get a chance to watch him leave. Regardless, the experience of seeing him and learning about the rule he was connected to left a bizarre, dampening feeling on my mood. I liked my job. I liked coming home and unwinding. I didn't mind being in the middle of nowhere. It felt nice to look up at the empty sky filled with stars. To see them shimmer and shine and even occasionally shoot across. I made a wish that things in my life would stay simple. I started to get a sense of his cadence. He'd usually show up once a month. The rare times I got to see him, I'd try to squeak in the odd question to my boss. Questions like, who is he? Where does he come from? And has anyone spoken with him? All mechanically met with I don't know, and if you're scared, you're welcome to quit. Then, as fate would have it, one day boss lady fell incredibly ill. My coworkers and I had to convince her to go home midway through her shift, her sickness falling uncomfortably within the usual 1-3 day window at the end of the month when our customer would typically appear. And of course there he was right after she went home. To my benefit, the other waiters and waitresses working the rounds were well aware of his presence and knew exactly what to do whenever he arrived. All of them knew to steer clear of him. Nevertheless, driven by a foundational curiosity that I just couldn't shake, I used this opportunity to go for it. I shouted a single thing across the floor, knowing Melanie wasn't there to chide me. "Hello, sir. What brings you here?" I asked him. He turned his head from his fixed position in his seat and put a hand to his ear. "Clever." I said, "What brings you here?" I called out again, a few notches louder this time, garnering some odd looks from our Thursday patrons. To my surprise, he spoke back. I am not sure why I was expecting his voice to carry the tone of some twisted, demented demon, maybe the fear Melanie had instilled in me. The man sounded exactly how he looked. "I am sorry, dear," he said, "I am afraid I am not sure what you're saying. Can you come over here and ask me again?" "Nope. I was good. And I don't mean to be rude about the service," he continued, "but it feels as if no one has taken my order for quite some time now." I let the exchange end there, diverting my attention back to the other guests.
As always, he'd eventually disappear without fanfare, without the clatter of the entrance bell or any sight or sound of his steps across the diner floor. Our backroom conversations about him remaining dreadfully short while he was there, just yes here and yes gone, and the odd, when we really needed to say it.
I feel really weird about this. It took me a while to understand where my brazenness to address this strange middle-aged man came from. In truth, I was just afraid. His presence and all of the questions tied to his being at our diner were disrupting this otherwise great arrangement that I felt I had. It seemed right in the moment to stand at the very edge of my bravery and say something to him. Of course, now that he was gone, I just felt worse. The next week, I was invited to something pretty interesting at work. I generally have a good amount of visibility into what Melanie, boss lady, does on a daily basis. The only element that remained elusive was her bi-weekly check-in with a particularly sharp-dressed agent-looking fella. There was a pretty consistent presence of state troopers, agents, and similarly uniformed men and women dropping into the diner, though I seldom paid it mind beyond simply noticing it. Midway through wiping down the tables, only an hour or so into my shift, Mel swung by and said, "Hey, want you in the meeting with the big boss if you have a few." "The big boss? Sure. Yeah. Coming. Just if you don't mind me asking, who is?" She let her eyes speak her unwritten rules to me, questions equals generally bad. "Thank you for the reminder, Mayim." We maneuvered to a back room and sat at a table. Across from us, already seated, was a man in a sharply tailored suit with a subtle earpiece in the aforementioned agent. The table was littered with a small, messy stack of notes, papers and documents. He made it a point to size me up, staring me down uninterrupted, like a deer to headlights, no concern at all about how awkward he was making it for me. Then, he turned to Melanie. "How long she been here?" he asked her in his gruff western drawl. 6 months, she said. "Why trust her?" "I trust her. Yes." He let his eyebrows say, "If you say so," then went on with it. "Alright, so, apparently I had a visit from the wandering man last week. You," he said, motioning to Melanie, "were out. But you," attention now shifted to me, "weren't he? Give me the lowdown." "The wandering man?" The agent caught the confusion in my eyes. "Jesus, you've told this girl nothing, haven't you?" he said to Melanie.
"Sir, I know it sounds weird," she said, "but I personally feel as if the man is almost, I don't know, drawn to curiosity."
"Like maybe the less I say to those not already in the know, the bet." "Wandering man," the agent cut her off, "is our nickname for the fella that sits in the corner of your fine little establishment. Or should I say, the state's fine little establishment." "I am sorry?" I asked. "That's correct. The state's. Congratulations, Mayim, you're part of a government operation." The wandering man, not just a cutesy little nickname but our legal definition of this tricky little problem, is a phenomenon we discovered many years ago. At the time, he'd just walked the desert landscape, chatting up unsuspecting strangers with bizarre questions. Everything fine, all honky-dory. A little weird, sure, but nothing illegal. However, sometimes things would happen because of him. Bizarre things. Grisly things. I could see Melanie groaning, concerned at the picture being painted. Would this pique my curiosity? "Have you guys, why no, taken him in for?" I almost wanted to cut off my own stupid question, but he ran with it. "Nope. Not because we don't want to, but rather because it might not be safe." The cozy mental image I'd held of this diner was starting to fracture. "We have reason to believe that he is a visitor," he said. "From?" I didn't attend another debrief after that. Not because I was barred, mind you. Rather, I just didn't want to know anymore. My gut no longer held curiosity. There was just a low, aching dread there now. The agents and troopers spaced out and seated amongst the eatery were now just a glaring reminder of what my dingy diner job really was. The government cavalry would mostly show up around the end of month window the wandering man was set to arrive in. When he'd appear, they wouldn't do much more than examine him from their distant tables, subtly scribbling notes into notebooks. He'd always act the same. He would just sit there. He wouldn't give them, or us the diner employees, much to go on. Speaking of employees, I remembered something Melanie told me after my first month of working here, that the worker turnover at this diner was incredibly high. Knowing at the time what everyone got paid, it made absolutely no sense to me. Now, 7 months into the gate, alongside a completely new set of cooks, waiters and waitresses from when I'd first started, I'd seen firsthand just how true her statement was. None of the leavers claimed as much, but I am sure the underlying premise of who the diner was really for became subconsciously clear to them during their time here. And it probably didn't sit all too well with them. I stayed. But not because of the pay. I am actually not sure why I did. We had a new cast of rookie employees now. The ones who understood the vague terms of the situation, just as Melanie, I and all former employees did, stuck around. Those who couldn't reconcile the situation with their inherent curiosity naturally filtered up. And then there was Malcolm. It was only his first week. He was a keener. Mega keener. He'd bulldozed through a giant list of tasks and was already asking for the next batch of work to chew through. Anything he could get ahead of, anything he could step in for, anything he could learn, he was on it. He wanted to be as helpful as humanly possible. I think the salary of the role for a guy his young age was just too alluring for him. For our part, Melanie and I tried our best to get him to pace himself. We were both giving the spiel now. By this point, we'd more or less perfected it. There are things about this diner that are strange. Rules you will have to follow and not think about. Rules that are concrete, immutable and non-negotiable, like gravity. He nodded. At that moment, I really believed he was internalizing my words. And if that doesn't work for you, and if you don't think you can take care of yourself, then you shouldn't work here, I continued. There was always a visceral feeling in my stomach whenever I saw the wandering man in the corner during the same week that we were onboarding new staff. I am sure Melanie felt it too. On those days, Mel and I would both work the till, and if we saw anyone coming out from the back, we'd stop them. With a simple grab of the arm.
Malcolm stepped out, and I did just that, a rough grasp of his forearm, just like Melanie had done to me when I'd first started.
He recalled in surprise. Remember that little chat about rules we just had? I said. He nodded meekly, as if he was already in trouble. I pointed to the man seated at the far table in the brown corduroy shirt, staring straight ahead with what I believed at the time no real reason to be here, and I said, "You will not, under any conditions, serve that man. Don't go up to him, don't talk to him. Pretend he doesn't exist." Malcolm lifted the garbage bag he was holding in his left hand. And my nervousness, I hadn't actually clocked what he was stepping out for. "Just doing garbage duty, ma'am," he said. But understood. And then he left out the front door with his usual swagger. The dumpster wasn't as close as we would like, so I appreciated his willingness to take on this duty so soon into his employment. I turned back to observe the wandering man. We had a crowd of agents in attendance that day, scattered about the restaurant. The man wasn't one to speak up often. Today was an interesting exception. "Officers," he said, "if you have any questions, feel free to join me at the table to ask them." The agents around the room reacted mainly with snickers. "Seriously, if you come sit with me, I'll be happy to spill it all. Truly." Even more laughs. But no one bit. And yet he continued, pointedly. "I know you're curious, I know you take notes, I know you talk about me, I know you built this establishment for me, I know you." As I reconciled the fact that this was the most words I'd ever heard him string together in succession, I heard the chime of the bell. A door had opened. Malcolm was dusting his hands as he entered through the diner's side door. A door which was situated right beside the table the wandering man was seated at. It all happened so fast. And yet it played out in front of me excruciatingly slowly, as if there was a moment, a single solitary second, where I could be stepped in. The wandering man dropped any pretext of an exchange with the agents, stopping his sentence midway and adopting a completely new demeanor. He played the role of a low, miserable, tired man and said, "Visits, terrible service every time," in a pathetic tone just as Malcolm walked by. Malcolm instinctively plucked a notepad out from his chest pocket and turned his head to face the man. "Hey, I got you, Chief, I can have Em bring something up for you, what are you?" And then Malcolm froze in place. And the wandering man's expression turned Cheshire cat wide. His neck alternated between tensing and fluttering, with what seemed to be undeniable excitement. The man started getting up from the table and then immediately, both of them were gone. Malcolm and the Wanderer had vanished out of existence entirely. The insanity of the moment was interrupted by the coded language I heard blared over a megaphone, nonsensical agent speak that has been seared into my memory forever. Alert level black. Wandering target has compromised a civilian. I repeat, civilian has been compromised. And that was that. Melanie quit in the days after. She wasn't mad at me. She told me she always knew she'd leave after the 10th disappearance. Why that specific milestone was required, I have no clue. All I could do from that point was continue to work.
On my commutes home, or during lunch breaks, I would look up at the stars, and put out the wish that Malcolm be brought back home.
Back from wherever he'd been taken. The debrief with the agents brought me no solace. The exchange with them was simple and short. Where was he taken to? Answered with he is gone now. With a perpetual dagger in my soul now, I had only the smallest of silver linings, if you can even call it that. A lesson. The lesson that I needed to be even more watchful. Even more diligent. And on days when the wandering man was visiting the only server at the diner. No exceptions. I knew the agents weren't happy about that. None of them said it to me explicitly, but I could tell that they would learn something new about him every time he whisked someone away after a mistake was made. It was a weird, Darwinian setup they had created. We were a zoo they could use to learn more about a specific animal. A specific entity. A specific visitor. No dice. They did just have to watch him sit now. Or wait for him to do something different. I waited for the 3-day stretch at the end of the month that he usually appears in. Things were quiet up until that point. When he finally showed up, it wasn't what I expected. For the first time ever, I saw the wandering man walk right through the front door. In the dead of night, at the tail end of my shift. I was at the till, paralyzed, as he took step after step to close the distance. And then he was right there. Standing in front of me. And I was sure, absolutely sure, that I was going to die. He smiled. "Don't worry. I have my own little set of rules I play by," he said. I didn't say a word. This was no man's land right now. I know you've been curious about me. I've admired it from the moment you first spoke up to address me. Cautious curiosity is a great thing to see in someone. Especially in such a reckless species. Please. Please just go. I'd like to answer a question about why I am visiting. I am sure you'd like to know why I am here, right? I am not curious anymore. I swear I am not. He laughed. The answer is really, painfully simple. This little game, this little charade I am playing. It is just so unbelievably fun. Please don't kill me. Please. You truly have a wonderful planet. I will return again soon. Promise. Give me a month, maybe 2 this time. A sincere, kind smile delivered with kind eyes. I'll come back with a new game. And then he was gone. It took me a minute to realize that there was a cake box sitting on the counter beside me. Maybe it was there the whole time he was speaking to me. Maybe it materialized right after he left. I opened the box to find Malcolm's severed head, a blank expression on his face, sitting on a bed of poorly and confusingly organized flowers. Almost as if there was an intention to create a floral arrangement, but no understanding of what something like that would look like. On top of the horrific display, written in an almost childlike handwriting, was a note that read, "I brought him back, just like you wished." The worst thing about being trapped at a diner in the middle of nowhere is that you realize that there really is nowhere else to run to. Every single part of our planet is blanketed by stars, by open sky. Someone could drop in any time. I found a secret room in my house with a strange mirror that shows a different family. I'm Jack, 34 years old, and life's been tough lately. After my divorce, I struggled to keep it together financially, juggling 2 jobs just to stay afloat. My daughter, Emma, lives with her mom, but I get to see her every other weekend. Buying a house seemed like a far-off dream, but when I found this old Victorian for a ridiculously low price, I couldn't pass it up. The house had charm, despite its age and a few creaky floors. It felt like the perfect place to start over, maybe even have Emma stay over more often. Everything seemed fine until I found the hidden room in the basement. I discovered it while clearing out some old furniture. There was a slight draft coming from behind a bookshelf. Moving the dusty shelf aside revealed a narrow door, almost as if the house itself was hiding something. With a bit of effort I pried it open, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down. Grabbing a flashlight I descended the stairs, my footsteps echoing off the stone walls. At the bottom was a small, cold room with a damp, musty smell. But what caught my attention was an old, ornate mirror leaning against the far wall. Its frame was carved with unsettling, grotesque figures that seemed to twist in the flickering light. As I approached the mirror, I noticed something bizarre. Instead of my reflection, I saw a different family. A man, a woman, and 2 children, all dressed in old-fashioned clothing. They stood in a room that looked eerily similar to my basement. Their eyes were wide and vacant, and their expressions sent chills down my spine. Curiosity got the better of me. I reached out to touch the mirror, half expecting my hand to pass through. Instead, I felt something solid and cold, the woman's face. It was like touching a life-sized figurine, her skin cold and hard like porcelain. I quickly pulled my hand back, horrified. The figures in the mirror began to move, their eyes following me. The man stepped forward, raising his hand as if to press against the glass. I heard a faint, muffled whisper, my name being called over and over. The children's faces twisted into malevolent grins, their eyes black and soulless. Panicking, I stumbled back and fled the basement, slamming the hidden door shut behind me. I tried to convince myself it was just an elaborate prank or some sort of old art installation. But deep down, I knew it was something far more sinister. For days I avoided the basement, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Strange things started happening around the house, doors creaking open on their own, cold drafts in the middle of the night, and whispering voices just on the edge of hearing. Tonight it got worse. I woke up to the sound of knocking on my bedroom door. At first I thought it was a dream, but then I heard it again, louder this time. They were calling my name. I grabbed my phone and checked the time, 3 a.m. I mustered the courage to approach the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob, but I stopped when I heard the voices. It was the family from the mirror. They were outside my door, their voices clear and filled with anger. Jack. Let us in, the man's voice was low and menacing. We just want to play, the children's voices chimed in, sweet yet sinister. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The knocking grew louder, more frantic. The door rattled as if something was trying to break through. I am writing this now because I don't know how much time I have left. They're not just in the mirror anymore. They've escaped and they want something from me. The door won't hold much longer and I can hear their twisted voices getting closer. If anyone finds this, please don't come here. Don't make the same mistake I did. They're almost through the door now. I can hear the wood splintering, their voices growing louder and more frenzied. They keep shouting my name and it won't be long before they break through. God help me, I don't know what they want, but I am terrified to find out. If I don't a candle in the dark. Ever since I could remember myself, I was a cowardly person. To formulate it in a lighter tone, I am prone to be scared. Living in a rural area with few kids around my age to play with, we all knew each other in the town and our families were either relatives or friends. My childhood friends had noticed my fidgeting when we would go to darker places. The quickening of my breaths when entering an abandoned townhouse. When going to the farms late at night to play hide and seek. While they picked on me from time to time, they didn't give me a hard time about it. They understood also that the world is dangerous enough, so having one person in your group who is too careful, keep the careless people in line. I was very good in games, throwing stones with precision on target cans, chasing dodgeball. However, I was exceptionally good at hide and seek, and being a scrawny little dude, was easy for me to fit in unlikely places. During the day I would go exploring on my own, and at night I knew where the best hiding spots were that were not too dark or far from an inhabited house. Yet I could feel the fear once in a while. A sudden gust of wind whistling through broken branches would be enough to make me very scared. When I was around 8, I told my parents about my fear of the dark. They initially told me that I think too much of it, but as the months went by and they saw my everyday efforts to avoid dark corners and always having the lights turned on in my room, they grew concerned. They asked me on whether I had a negative experience in my past while being in the dark. I didn't. I always had this fear that in the dark, no one is truly alone. That something is there always, waiting to drop my guard. My grandmother, who happened to be in the house during this conversation, she was looking at me concerned and, at the same time, nodding at me. As in a way to tell me that my concerns were valid. In the following years, I put a lot of effort in my academics and fitness. I signed up to a couple of self-defense classes that boosted my confidence in myself, although I still remained thin and short. This fear of the dark, while it lessened, it never vanished even when I finished high school and was about to study at a college a bit too far from my homely town. My grandmother, bless her soul, had visited us that fateful morning when I was preparing to move to the uni dorms. She asked my parents that she wanted to talk to me in private, and while initially surprised, they did as she asked and went to carry my stuff in their car. "Amy boy," she said with a calm tone, her brown eyes losing their usual joyful gleam. "Living alone in a dark, cold city is different. I worked in that city and other cities for many years to bring food on the table. Your dear grandfather also was a hard-working man. He taught me how to protect myself. I never needed to use what he taught me. But he also knew that there was one more thing that made me scared." "Yes," she admitted as I looked at her surprised. "It dark," she continued as I didn't interrupt her, "has always been a fear for me. I never had anything bad happen to me in it, but it always made me wary. You know how some stories go. Demons, ghouls, ghosts, etc. We often hear that the true monster under the bed is human. But what if it actually isn't? Eh?" I nodded at her, my hands trembling a bit. Having going to a psychologist for this didn't help. Session after session, my fears got little, yet they still are there. "Eh?" She nodded at that. She gently took my trembling hands in hers. She was trembling a bit too. "Maybe I have an issue or a curse that I passed it down on you, my darling Lucas. We all have problems. However, a few years ago, when your grandfather was in his deathbed for over 2 weeks, he told me to keep the lights open when it was night, every single night. He never liked to have them on next to his bed, which is why I had a night lamp always on my side of the bed and not his. Right there though, in that hospital room, he asked me that. I did so. He then told me he could sometimes see shadows in the hospital. And sometimes those shadows didn't neither natural nor friendly. Before he passed away, he gave me this cross to wear around my neck. It was a gift from his godfather. He told me even during the war that cross was his candle in the dark. He never took it off and he always felt that it gave him courage." She opened her woven bag and took the cross out. I inclined my head, understanding. She wore it on my neck and kissed the top of my head. Ever since I wore this cross, I felt more at ease when it would be dark. I stopped using my lamp from time to time. The fear was still there, yet I felt as if your grandfather was next to me, guarding me against whatever was lurking behind the dark curtain of the night. May it be your candle now, a small reminder that dawn always comes even after the darkest of nights. I thanked her profusely and we shed tears of farewell. I love her a lot, and now I know one more reason why. She understood me completely. It wasn't easy getting used to the city life. Working part-time at a bakery and hustling through my engineering degree was taxing on my body. Yet I had 2 cool roommates at the dorm and we kept each other good company in and out of the dorms. I was on one hand aware of my surroundings, especially late at night when I could return home from a party. But I never got rid of my need for exploration. So I knew which routes and shortcuts to use at night, because I had already explored them during the day. One such route, however, was next to an abandoned, soon-to-be-demolished hotel. While it was open for visitation as a soon-to-be-demolished historical landmark, that place gave me the chills since the first time I laid my eyes upon it. It had a very creepy vibe, the same type of vibe I felt towards darkness, only this place made me feel actually nauseous when I was near it. As if something or someone really dangerous was lurking in its shadows of the night. I tried to explore it during the day, to face my fear within its dusty beige and flowery decorated walls that started to smell of mold. Yet that place was making me feel pure dread even during the day. Its basement was the creepiest place I had visited in my life. Even during the hours of the day, I felt pure fear just being in there. In its grey walls and emptiness, I could feel a resounding presence. What also didn't help were the local news, which were reporting disappearances of people every couple of months near that area. Since I heard those news, I never went to explore that building again. I even bought a pepper spray can, just in case, when I had to go even remotely near that place. It was right in the middle of my quickest route back home from the city center. Every night, I used a different route to go home after a party. Every night. Not that night 2 months ago. Because that was when I met some monsters. It was a Friday night. The third-year engineering students at uni made a collab party with the philosophy third years. It was an interesting party and people really hit it off. My roommates Josh and Chris were also there, dancing and meeting new people. I was there just for the vibes. I had the next morning off at the bakery, so I just wanted to drink a couple of beers and chill. It was almost summer and we had no written exams except for written projects, so it was all good. I decided to stroll back home at around 2:30 am, my mates wanted to stay more so, I wished them a good time and went back on my own. It wasn't the first time I did that and I never encountered problematic strangers on the way home. Not this night. I was halfway through on one of the paths I was using to go home. This path was dimly lit by a couple of street lights. Not many houses were around, only some shops that were closed for the night. I saw from afar 3 large-looking men nudging a person between them. When I took a closer look, I felt terror in the pit of my stomach. That person was a young woman, no older than me. Under the street lamp, I could see that her hair were a mess and something was trickling down from the mouth. Blood. One of those brutes were choking her strong enough to make her not scream for help. I was frozen stiff in fear. Quickly, I moved to the side behind another street lamp. I sent my GPS coordinates to my mates and told them to call the police right now. Thankfully, they saw my message instantly. I then took pictures and a short video, showing how they were dragging the poor woman with them and I sent them to my friends. While I was about to call the police myself, I stood appalled and terrified at what I was witnessing. She was putting up a fight and at one point, one of them punched her in the face. That's what took me out of my terrified state. That woman was suffering and God knows what else those assholes would do to her. I couldn't rely solely on the police. Friday nights were the worst, the police department would have their hands full of burglaries and other crimes. It would take them at least 10 minutes to respond and that might be too late for her. So, I looked around me and saw some large stones. I put some in my pockets and threw the largest one at the direction of the men. It hit the arm of one of them with a loud noise. As he turned around to see what was that, I threw another one that hit him square on his temple and he dropped on the pavement unconscious. "A comb take on someone your size," I shouted as I threw one stone after another at the other two, hitting him in the shoulder. I was good at aiming, too many games of dodgeball taught me how to be accurate with my throws. The 2 assholes dropped the woman like a sack of potatoes on the ground and raced straight at me. I felt the adrenaline hit me and before I realized it, I was running full speed away from them, while glancing back and throwing them more stones. They were screaming in anger as they were approaching me but I was speeding up. I could feel the vibrations in right pocket from my phone but I couldn't answer right now. They were gaining on me, so I turned abruptly to my left and used a different path. That path was leading near where the woman was lying and the third man was still down. I ran and saw that the young woman wasn't there anymore but the man was still on the ground. She escaped, I thought with glee as I ran in the routes ahead of me. At one point though, I saw only one of them behind me. Oh crap. I then realized I was in the lot where the damn hotel was. And it had 2 ways out, if one of them was right behind me the other was right across me. The lot had no other ways out, it was like a cage because of smaller demolitions that needed to be done in some service buildings right outside the hotel. I looked at the threatening figures gaining on me. I froze for a second. I could escape them by entering the hotel and exiting via the door in its basement. Yet I knew something dreadful was in there in that basement. Yet I thought if something dreadful was in there I shouldn't be afraid, not now. I needed to be strong. I lunged towards the hotel's entrance, my sudden change of course disorienting my pursuers. They soon followed after me. I was faster than them now in the dark. Under the dim city lights I could see quite clearly in front of me. I followed the dusty corridor to my right and went down the only set of stairs leading to the basement. That's when I felt it. That's when I knew. Someone was in here in the almost complete darkness of the basement. The only light that was entering was from the almost closed exit door. No windows, no lamps. When I ran towards the door on the right side of the basement, my feelings of dread and panic multiplied. There was a lock and chain on the door. I tried to open it but it wouldn't budge. I felt the darkness around me like a thick blanket ready to strangle me while also hearing footsteps on the floor above. The assholes were coming down here. In that moment I felt as if my life passed in front of me. There was no way out other than those stairs. If I tried to use them now, there was a high chance they would get me while they would come down here. And if they got me, I was a dead man, I knew it. I felt my grandmother's cross over my beating heart. I wasn't alone. I felt a soft feeling of relief and bravery engulfing my trembling limbs. I took a deep breath and in the pitch black darkness, the city lights showed me a bunch of desks and chairs towards the left corner of the large room. Those weren't here 2 years ago. I ran towards them despite an alarming feeling of fear that hit me when I looked towards the dark, left corner. I hid in between some of them offices. They were large and heavy desks and I found a small nook between 2 of the ones further to the front to hide in it. People in hide and seek always look for the furthest, darkest corners, not the upfront, obvious hiding places. I held my breath. I then took deep breaths to calm myself down. Beads of sweat fell on my forehead, my shirt was drenched. I felt the ground beneath me and felt something like a heavy brick. I took it in my right hand. If they were to find me or catch me while running away, I wouldn't go down without a fight. I took my phone out, texted my location to my friends, but I had no signal. Damn it. I checked my other pocket. I had a couple of stones left. Maybe I could use them to distract them. The steps got closer to the stairs. I breathed shakily, then slowly, then silently. My heart was pumping in terror as I saw the two men enter the basement. In that moment, my vision got darker. As if the darkness in the basement was thicker, heavier. I felt the cross on my chest become heavy and warm. I raised my left hand and, to my amazement and horror, I felt that the cross was almost too hot to hold. Something was very wrong in this place. The men entered the basement. One of them was lighting up the place and checking the desks one by one, while the other was guarding the stairs. I didn't think that far, they did. If they find me. The cross was now burning in my grasp, but I didn't let go. I was suddenly feeling all my senses to scream at me to run away from something infinitely more terrible than those two monsters. "Come out, you piece of shit," the dude in front of the stairs shouted, gasping for air. "You will find you and we will have our sweet time taking turns beating you up, little punk." Hey. His voice was deep and was threatening, but it didn't matter. I wanted to shout at them to run away. I didn't know what it was. I looked through the small crack in front of me. I froze. My limbs felt suddenly paralyzed. On the left corner of the room, from where I was standing close to a few minutes ago, was a figure. It was tall, abnormally tall. It was wearing a top hat and a tux, yet I couldn't see arms from the sleeves. It had its back towards the room. But I felt it. It wasn't human. Yo, I heard the dude standing in front of the stairs when his phone's light centered on that figure. His buddy also audibly gasped. "Yo, the fuck is that?" one of them asked, and the other just shrugged his shoulders. The rooms felt darker and darker by the second. The light from their phones started to flicker. "Sir, we're looking for a scrawny ass punk. He is our friend AE. Is he a friend like that woman you were planning to have your way with a few minutes ago?" AE. My body now was completely numb. My hand was on my cross and I felt it burn. It was the only thing that reminded me that this was real. That male voice was smooth, almost intoxicating to listen to. But it also felt as if it was a guttural growl from a beast. "You're that poor old couple you killed 2 weeks ago. Or that young father you found near your turd and shot on the back. Should I go on?" AE. The two dudes looked suddenly terrified. One of them pulled a gun out of his pocket. "You the fuck are you?" AE. The figure slowly turned, and that's when I screamed. There was an ending darkness in those empty sockets for eyes, except for an alarming gleam reminiscent of the light of a hunter's moon. The nose was abnormally big and sharp, the face of the skin gray, wrinkled and decaying. And its mouth was terrifyingly wide, with countless black teeth forming a horrific smile that was pointed towards me. The men gasped loudly, one dropping his phone, the other looking towards my direction and then towards the thing. In the last flicker of his phone's light, the figure disappeared from the corner and appeared in front of the two now terrified men. As they started screaming and shooting at it, I saw that thing's upper limbs exiting the tux's sleeves, bony and black from rotten flesh, piercing the head of the dude with the gun. It then tore off the head and threw it to the side, while its mouth took a bite from the headless corpse's neck. The other man screamed bloody murder, but the beast pierced his chest with its limbs and dragging him towards it. Muffled screams and blood gurgling and bone crunching were the only sounds in the basement. The screams were soon gone, the gurgling was gone, the bones crunching sounds disappeared. That thing ate both of them, and I saw it all, under the dimness of the city lights from the basement's door and under the flickering of their phone's torches. Not even the bones remained, not even a drop of blood. I was trembling in fear, tears coming down my eyes. I was next. The figure stood. It looked at me, those horrific eyes piercing my own. I felt it hated me in that moment. That thing wanted to tear me to pieces. In an enraged voice, stripped from all the smoothness and the inviting tone of before, that thing growled. "If it wasn't for that thing you have around your neck, I'd have you for dessert." AE. The figure disappeared in a black smog. I don't know how long I was in that nope. I don't know how many hours of shock my brain tried to process. It was way after 6 a.m. that I saw the light of dawn piercing through the basement door. I mustered the courage to crawl out of my hiding spot. I stood up, my mind hazy and dizzy, my limbs trembling from weakness and tiredness. I approached the stairs, not daring to look to my left. Not even a drop of blood was there. Only their dropped, crushed phones. Their torches were still on. I left them there. I looked behind me, towards the corner. I could feel it was there. Now invisible under the light of day, but waiting. It could be Lucas. I felt terror again in my heart. It knew my name. I ran as fast as I could up the stairs, not looking back. I ran and ran and ran until I reached in front of my dorms. I entered my room and my friends were there. They looked at me relieved and came to hug me. I hugged them back, crying harder than I ever did before. The terror gave its place in overwhelming relief. I don't remember how I got into the shower and then went to the police station to give a testimony of the events. I met the woman who was assaulted at the police station. Thankfully she wasn't severely injured by those brutes and she was already treated at the hospital. When she saw me, she rushed to come close to me and hugged me, thanking me for helping her. She had managed to run away to a nearby pub and soon after she contacted also the police. The police had already arrived on the spot where my friends had instructed them to go, based on the coordinates I sent to them in that message. They arrested that man.
After I left the basement and my phone gained signal, my friends sent them the coordinates of the hotel that they had just received.
They also checked the hotel, except for the phones. They found nothing from the other two criminals. I knew though. As I recounted with the woman and the police the events of that night, I knew what happened to those two. Yet I didn't say anything about what that thing did to them. No one would believe me. Those men were wannabe monsters who met their end by the hands of an actual monster. I am now in my room, the lights turned on. Every whistle of the wind outside makes me flinch and look around. Every shadow I see in the corners makes me terrified. I still remember those hollow, dark eyes with that horrible orange gleam. I don't know if I ever feel okay. But suddenly I reminded myself. I looked at my left palm. The burned imprint of my grandmother's cross was there, the only reminder of the reality of what happened. And the reminder that in my hour of need in the thick murderous darkness, I wasn't alone. I touched the cross over my chest, my candle in the dark. I pulled it towards my temple and for the first time in my life I prayed. I prayed in gratitude. I was alive. That woman was alive. The two criminals were dead. The third was behind bars. But the monster was in that basement, lurking, waiting for its next victim. I just hope that when the building is demolished, that thing will stay in the shadows under the rubbles forever. Upvote 25. Downvote 4. Comments 0 premios. Comparter. We were driving cross country when we entered a tunnel. Do not try to find it. My wife Mia and I were driving cross country. It was our first attempt at the Great American Road Trip. Mia and I rented a small Rarier, more of a camper than a full-blown Rarier. We packed up a couple suitcases with plenty of room for any souvenirs and we hit the dusty trail. We started our journey on the Mother Road Route 66, driving south from Chicago until we connected to I and shot straight west through Missouri. The goal was to see those parts of the country we had never seen before, stopping anywhere that seemed interesting. From the plains of Kansas up through the badlands of Wyoming and South Dakota. In Missouri we saw the world's largest cap gun. In Kansas we visited the Evel Knievel Museum and the world's largest belt buckle. We love all those kitsy, tourist trap places. Eventually we made it to Colorado and after a few hours more of driving through amber waves of grain, we saw them. The Rocky Mountains. We made an exit and headed north through the winding mountain highways. The Rockies were gorgeous. Snow-capped in the middle of summer, some of the peaks pierced through the white fluffy clouds. We saw a sign that read traffic tunnel -3 miles. A little further and sure enough, there it was, a large tunnel bored directly through the mountain in front of us. A large sign read, Pike Tunnel, longest traffic tunnel in the nation. Please turn your headlights on now. How long is it? Asked Mia. That's what she said, I quipped. But she was right, there was no information beyond the detail that this was the longest tunnel in the nation. Can't it be more than a mile or two, I said as I watched the little white car ahead of us slip into the darkness. A moment later we joined it. The tunnel was lit by fluorescence that gave everything a greenish-yellow tinge. On the left-hand side was a raised walkway behind a railing for maintenance access. Initially I was struck by the incredible amount of work that went into the construction of this man-made marvel. We're under 1 million tons of Rocky Mountain right now, I said. How many years before this caves in? Mia responded. I shot her a look. Let us save the cave-in talk until we re-out on the other side. I am just saying, nature will take this back eventually, she continued. I scanned the empty road ahead of us. Where did the other car go? I asked. We were now alone in the tunnel, no cars ahead of us nor behind us. Huh. They must have sped off ahead. Maybe they were scared of a cave-in. My Spotify playlist had stopped playing. Mia looked at the phone. No cell service. She turned on the radio and spun the dial only to find static. You're not going to be able to pick up a station in here, I said. She turned the volume down. Just wanted to check. If only we had some CDs. This tunnel really keeps going. I would have thought we'd be through it by now, I replied. I looked at the raw ERS odometer, miles. I picked up speed. I wanted to try and catch up to the little white car. Up until this point, the tunnel was a straight shot, but now the tunnel started to curve to the right. It may have been my imagination, but it also felt as though we were descending. Mia felt it too and she started to get antsy. Where did that other car go? How long is this tunnel? There was an urgency in her voice. I was getting nervous. Claustrophobia was not usually a problem for me, but when I looked down at the odometer and I saw that it had gone up by 3 miles, my mind began to wander to unsettling places. We were descending in altitude. I could feel it. I could see a slope in the lights on the ceiling and the railing of the maintenance walkway. I could feel a pressure in my head and I was getting cold. Could you grab me a Coke from the back, Mia? I couldn't have Mia getting anxious. That would only start a chain reaction and make me freak out, which would then make her freak out. She unbuckled and ducked into the back of the RORI to where we had a cooler stocked with drinks and food. Just as she stepped into the back, I saw something. There, standing on the side of the road, was a man wearing a reflective safety vest and a hard hat. He was waving to me as I passed him by. Something about him looked strange. I watched him in the side view mirror as we passed, and he was still watching the RORI, still waving at the back of our vehicle as he faded into the distance. Mia reappeared from the back of the RORI, Coke in hand. She popped it and handed it to me. You look worried. I am fine, I smiled and took a sip of the Coke. Eric, slow down. I slammed on the brakes as I saw what made me scream. In the road in front of us was a roadblock. 2 reflective traffic sawhorses blocked both lanes of the tunnel. Beyond the roadblock, the lights of the tunnel were dark. There was nothing but a void of blackness. Standing in front of the roadblock was another man wearing a reflective vest and a hard hat, only this time his hard hat had a light on top which obscured his face. We came to a jolting stop. I turned to Mia. Are you okay? I asked. I am fine, she replied. It is a cave-in, isn't it? God, I hope not. I rolled down the window, leaned out and yelled to the man in the hard hat. Hey! What is going on? The man was about 5 yards away. He took 2 steps towards us and then raised a hand to his mouth and yelled. Just doing some maintenance. How long is it going to take? I yelled back. The man made a hand gesture as if he didn't hear me. How long is it going to take? I called again. He made the same gesture. I unbuckled my seatbelt and grabbed the door release. What are you doing? Mia asked. I gotta know what is going on. Eric, just stay here, it might not be safe. I'll be just a second, I said. I pushed the door open and stepped down from the RORI. Stay in your vehicle? The man yelled. He took a couple steps towards me with his hand out telling me to stop. What is the hold up? I shouted. The man was a bit closer now, but I still couldn't see his face through the shining light on his helmet. Please stay in your vehicle? He shouted. There was something off about him. Then I heard it. Ishawoo. A scream or something rolled from deep in the tunnel. The worker turned and looked into the darkness. Then he ran past the barricades and soon all we could see of him was the light on his helmet. The light disappeared a moment later. What the hell was that? Is someone hurt? Mia asked. I have no idea, I said. Should we do something? Mia asked. I just sat there and watched the pitch black tunnel in front of me. I had no idea what to tell her. I checked the side view mirrors. There was still nobody behind us. Where are the other cars? I asked. They must have gotten through before the roadblock. Or maybe they caused the roadblock. Mia replied. I saw another worker a little ways back. We could try to go back and talk to him. We'd be going straight into any oncoming cars. There's a maintenance walkway. We didn't pass in that long ago. We can probably catch him on foot. Maybe we should just wait for the guy to come back. She reached over and grabbed my arm. I squeezed her hand. She was right. I looked out at the tunnel ahead of us. I turned on the Rorier's high beams, but all I could see beyond the roadblock was more tunnel and more road. I checked my phone. Unsurprisingly, there was no service still. We waited, but the man never came back. It has been 20 minutes, Mia said. How come there hasn't been another car behind us? I was having the same thought. I rolled down my window and stuck my head out. I looked back at the road behind us. It went back about 200 yards before curving out of sight. There was no sign of that first worker I saw on the maintenance walkway. I looked at the roadblock ahead of us and clicked on the Rorier's high beams. There was nothing beyond the roadblock but more tunnel. It didn't look like it was under construction, just very dark. I think we should keep going, I said. What about the roadblock? We'll move those sawhorses out of the way and just drive past, I said as I opened my door. Mia looked at me, then she cast her eyes to the dark tunnel ahead of us. I knew she was processing the same limited options that I was. Driving backwards would be a huge risk in the instance of another car finally coming along. Getting out and walking would take God knows how long. We could have driven 10 miles at this point. Forward was our best option. Let us do it, Mia said. We jumped out and quickly pulled the two sawhorses out of the right lane. I pulled the Rorier up past the barriers, then we jumped out again and put the sawhorses back where they were. We didn't need another car to come barreling through. We were finally moving again, slowly. It was pitch black save for the high beams of the Rorier. We crept forward at around 15 miles per hour. As the tunnel turned and twisted, my eyes started to play tricks on me. I kept seeing shapes at the furthest point of the tunnel. I kept seeing something standing just at the end of the next bend, but as we rolled forward, there was nothing there. Where are the workers? Mia asked. I don't know. I was done rationalizing. This was all wrong. Traffic tunnels are never this long. My mind started to wander to all the road trip urban legends I'd read about, the killer in the backseat, the disappearing gas station, the pale man in the cornfield. Did we stumble into some strange outlier location? An in-between point on the endless roads that cross this country? Then I saw it. Look. A person. Thank God. Mia shouted. As we rounded a curve in the tunnel, a group of maintenance workers entered our view. The three of them stood on the left side of the road behind two more sawhorses topped with flashing lights. Two of them faced towards us, the third was facing the other two. The one with his back to us wore a light on his hard hat. Was this the same guy we saw earlier? How did he get this far away? I approached slowly and rolled down the window. Hey! You left us waiting back there. I yelled. There was no response. In fact, all three men were completely silent, and it was hard to tell in the flashing light of the sawhorses, but they looked to be standing completely still. Hello? I yelled again. I pushed open my door and stepped out onto the pavement. Eric, wait. I held up a finger to Mia. Just a second. I slowly stepped towards the three men. Hello? No response. What the fuck? The bright lights of the sawhorses obscured their faces. I kept moving closer. Hey, what is going on? Then I saw it. Their faces. They were plastic. In front of me stood three mannequins. I backed away toward the Rorier, then I turned and walked hurriedly to the vehicle. I was seriously freaked out, but I didn't want to alarm Mia. I climbed into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. They were mannequins. I said. What? They were mannequins. Why? What? I don't know. I looked back over at the three figures and my blood ran cold. The hard-hat mannequin had somehow turned around to face us. All three figures appeared to be watching us now. Then we heard it. A loud resonant banging on the side and then the roof of the Rorier. What the hell was that? Mia whispered. We listened, holding our breath. Then. A shuffling sound. Something was moving on her in the Rorier. Stay here. I said. I got up. Eric, wait. I moved to the back of the Rorier. It was dark. I went for a drawer in the kitchenette space and pulled out a flashlight. I moved to the rear of the Rorier, the bedroom. My flashlight illuminated an empty room. Whoever is back here, I have a gun. A shitty bluff. But I didn't see anything. I shone the light out of the windows of each side of the Rarier, nothing. Then I heard it. A shuffling sound from right above me. I looked up and screamed. Fuck. On the roof of the Rarier, staring through the skylight, was a woman with vacuous black eyes and a dead smile. Her stringy black hair dangled down towards me, casting thin black shadows across her horrible pale face. Mia, drive. Fast. I screamed. Mia jumped over to the driver's seat, shifted into gear and stomped on the gas. The Rarier was clunky, but it could move when it needed to. We lurched forward and I fell back. I trained my flashlight up onto the skylight again and the woman was gone. I scrambled to my feet and looked out of the side windows. Did Mia shake her off? There was no sign of the woman. I moved to the passenger seat, breathing heavily and sweating. What happened? She asked, keeping the Rarier at a steady 50 miles per hour. There was a woman on the roof, I said flatly. I realized now that I was in a kind of shock. A woman? Her eyes were black. Mia just looked at me, then back at the tunnel ahead of us. There's something wrong with this tunnel. I whispered. Mia pointed at the road ahead. Look. I looked out at the tunnel. There were more mannequins. A lot more mannequins. They were positioned on both sides of the road. They were all facing us, and even though I never saw them move, when I looked in the side view mirror, they were somehow still facing us, turning to watch us as we drove past. Watching without eyes. Just keep driving. I said. As we drove on, the mannequins crowded the sides of the road more and more. There were thousands of them. Eventually they were so close that some of their outstretched arms hit the side of the Rarier. They were closing in on us, squeezing our path forward. One stood in the middle of the road. I don't think I can get around it. Run it over. Don't stop. The Rarier smashed into the mannequin. Its head shot forward and bounced against the windshield, and the vehicle shuddered as it rolled over the body. Soon there were two in the road. Then three. I could see where this was going. Pretty soon there would be too many for the Rarier to ram through, but goddammit, we were going to get through as many as we could. Speed up, Mia. Crash. The sound was surreal, smashing into mannequin after mannequin at nearly 60 miles per hour. Hands, legs, heads and torsos flew. The windshield cracked, the Rarier shuddered and screamed and eventually slowed down, despite the screaming engine. I am certain the axle was jammed up with lifeless, plastic body parts. Eventually we came to a stop. She won't move, Mia said. She pressed on the gas, but it was no use, the Rarier just rocked a little bit. Try reverse. She shifted and pressed on the gas. We got some decent movement before running into another jam. Fuck. Should we get out and look? Mia asked. I'll go, I said as I grabbed the flashlight and popped the passenger door. Mia unbuckled her seatbelt. We'll go together. We stumbled out of the Rarier on the passenger side. It was like stepping into hell. Countless, lifeless faces stared out at us from the darkness. The only light came from the headlights of the Rarier and my flashlight. We clumsily made our way along the side of the Rarier. The ground was littered with mannequin pieces. I thought to myself, if we could get a couple yards cleared out behind the rear tires, we might be able to back out and get enough momentum to reverse all the way back out of here. Instead, when we got to the back of the Rarier, my stomach flipped and my heart sank. I was expecting to see a trail of flattened mannequins. Instead, the Rarier was now surrounded by thousands of perfectly intact mannequins standing at attention. As if their ranks had somehow been replenished after our vehicular assault. This is impossible. She started to cry. I held her close. We'll keep moving. I said. It will never end. The tunnel makes no sense. It only curves one direction. I looked at her. What do you mean? This whole time the tunnel has only been curving to the right. It would sometimes straighten out or go left for a few yards, but before too long we were curving to the right again. We've either been driving in circles or spiraling downwards. So we'll go back the way we came and hope we're not going in circles. I said. We had been driving for hours at this point. Walking back out the way we came would take days. But now that I thought about it, Mia was right, we'd only been curving to the right. This tunnel seemed to be very gradually taking us downwards into the earth. Going forward would not get us any closer to escape. We'll need food from the Rarier, Mia said. I nodded and we stumbled our way back to the front of the Rariere, the mannequins' lifeless faces watching us the whole time. I stepped up to the passenger door and nearly fell back when I looked through the window. What the fuck? I breathed. What I saw were two mannequins sitting in the driver's and passenger's seat. How they got in there? I have no idea, but what really made my blood run cold was that they were dressed exactly like me and I. They wore identical sets of clothes. The one in the passenger seat had my same New Order t-shirt and black jeans. The one in the driver's seat had Mia's green striped sweater and denim shorts. Their plastic faces stared out through the shattered windshield at the endless crowd of mannequins staring back at them. Mia stepped up and saw the uncanny display. What the fuck? Mia echoed. I pulled myself up into the Rariere and slowly stepped around my mannequin doppelganger. I avoided looking into its face, but I swear I could feel it watching me as I stumbled around it. Mia followed and we made our way into the back of our dark Rariere. Luckily we had just stocked our cooler full of deli meat and water not long after crossing the Colorado state line. I handed Mia the flashlight and pulled open the cooler. I filled a backpack full of food and water. I turned and saw them. My mannequin double had somehow moved. It was standing in the aisle watching us. Mia's doppelganger was still seated in the driver's seat but had turned to peer back at us with its eyeless gaze. Mia saw the look in my eyes and turned. She screamed when she saw them and backed into me. I put my arm around her and we stood there a moment, letting our skyrocketing heart rates return to earth. Let us get out of here, I said. I slid the backpack onto my shoulders. Mia joined me at the door. I looked into her eyes. Are you ready? She nodded. I kissed her. I love you, I said. I love you, she said. The look on her face killed me. She was terrified. I am sure the look on my face was similar. I opened the door and we stepped out.
We again stumbled to the back of the Rariere. Once we were clear of the Rariere and all the crushed mannequin body parts, it became easier to find footing, though weaving through an endless crowd of lifeless people was a slow process.
It was pitch black. Without the flashlight we wouldn't be able to see a foot in front of us. As I walked, the beam of light created the illusion of movement in the crowd. At least I hoped it was an illusion. The limbs of the mannequins seemed to stretch and turn, but the only sound was that of Mia and I shuffling our way through the crowded tunnel. Things went on like this for what felt like hours. Mia and I were sweating and aching. I was about to suggest we stop and rest, but then I saw it and I froze. Out in the crowd, beyond rows of blank faces, I saw a pale face, black hair and a dead smile. I saw two vacuous eyes staring right at me. Mia, do you see her? I whispered. See who? I slowly raised my arm and pointed. It was the woman, or whatever it was, that stared back at me through the skylight on the roof of the Rariere. Oh my god. Mia squeaked. I could see now that the pale-faced woman was tall. A few inches taller than the mannequins. As I pointed, she stared back at me with the terrible grin. What do we do? Mia whispered. I raised the flashlight and pointed it right at the pale-faced woman. I thought maybe this would scare her off. I was wrong. The light only made her appear more unsettling as she stared back unflinchingly. What do you want? I yelled. She only stared back at me. She was as still as the mannequins. We have to keep going. I whispered. Mia didn't respond. Her body was tense as she held on to me. We've come this far, we can turn back again, I continued. I pulled Mia's hand and we continued on our way through the mannequins, keeping the distance between us and her as wide as possible. As we moved past, she kept watching us. Though her movements were imperceptible to us, her eyes never left us. Like one of those portraits whose eyes appear to watch you no matter where you stand. Finally, we got far enough that she was out of sight. But the thought of her being somewhere behind us only unsettled me further and I quickened our pace. As the hours wore on, there was no sign of the pale-faced woman and the crowd of mannequins began to thin out. They still populated the tunnel from one end to the other, but there was more space between them, allowing Mia and I to walk more freely. The mannequins on the maintenance walkway on the side of the tunnel seemed to thin out as well, and I decided it would give us a better vantage if we were walking up there. I helped Mia climb up the railing that bordered the walkway, then I climbed up behind her. The walkway was elevated 3 or 4 feet above the roadway. We could easily see over the heads of the mannequins in both directions. There was, of course, no end to the tunnel in sight. We kept walking. The mannequins continued to thin out, but they were different now. There were mannequins dressed as maintenance workers again, but also mannequins dressed as families and businessmen. There was even a group of mannequin nuns standing in a single file line, heads bowed in prayer. Needless to say, we passed none of this on the way into the tunnel. I was feeling very hopeless that we were going to be able to find our way out. I was far beyond speculating how this was at all possible. It is not possible. And even if it were, there is no good reason for someone to do this to us. The only explanation was the supernatural. Then I saw her. Rather, I saw them. Arranged in the middle of the tunnel was a circle of mannequins with long black hair and tattered cloth. They looked exactly like the pale-faced woman, minus any facial features. I kept a close watch on them as we passed to make sure they didn't start following us. A door. Mia shouted. Mia pointed a few paces ahead of her. There was a door leading into the wall of the tunnel. We ran towards it. Mia grabbed the handle, turned it and pulled. It was heavy and Mia had to brace her foot on the wall to get it moving. The metal door groaned as if it hadn't been opened in years. Finally it was open enough to see past. It was a hallway. It went out about 5 yards then turned right at a 90-degree angle. The strangest part was the design of the hallway. It wasn't cement or pavement like the tunnel. The walls were wood paneled and the floor was covered in a thick carpet, like a house from the 1970s. I say we see where this takes us, Mia said. There was no reason to disagree, but I wasn't going to get us trapped in there. I opened up my backpack and took out a water bottle. I opened it and handed it to Mia. She drank half, then I drank the other half. I slowly closed the door, shoving the empty water bottle in the crack to keep it from closing all the way. I turned to Mia. Okay, let us go. We slowly made our way down the quiet hallway. We got down to where the hallway cornered to the right and that's when we heard it. Ka-chunk. I whipped around. The door had closed behind us. I ran back to it and tried to push it open, but it was no use. There was no way it closed on its own. Someone had to have removed the water bottle. Our path had been chosen for us. There was no turning back. We continued down the hallway. We turned right. The hallway continued, then turned right again. That should have led us right back to the tunnel. But it didn't. This part of the hallway went on far longer than was possible without running into the tunnel. Then it turned right again. It went on like this. Sometimes a section of the hallway was 20 feet long, sometimes it was 20 yards long, sometimes it was 3 feet long. But it always turned to the right. At first it was a relief to be somewhere other than the cold, dark tunnel. But the hallway very quickly became claustrophobic and before too long, I heard someone walking behind us. We had stopped to take a break and I heard a third pair of footsteps on the carpet coming from behind us. I backtracked to the last corner. I was terrified as I slowly peeked around the corner, tense and waiting to see the vacuous eyes and inky black hair of the pale-faced woman. But there was nothing there. I wasn't about to backtrack any further. There was no one there. I whispered. Mia slumped against the wall and slid down to the carpet. I think I need to rest, she said. I put my backpack down on the ground for Mia to use as a pillow. She laid her head down and was passed out in seconds. I had no idea how long we had been walking at this point. I stood leaning against the wall. My body was telling me to rest, but I couldn't risk falling asleep. I had to keep watch. I knew she was following us. I took in the details of the hallway for the first time. The carpet was a dull brown and the walls a cheap wood paneling. The hanging lighting fixtures were shaded by stained glass, something you might see in an old diner. Who built this place? Did someone pick out the carpet and the lighting fixtures? Did a team of workers blast these tunnels into the earth? Or has this place always existed? Was this purgatory? I began to feel dizzy. I was panicking. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. I slumped to the floor and tried to slow my breathing. I closed my eyes. I shot up in a panic. I had fallen asleep while I was meant to be keeping watch. I snapped to my feet and looked around. Mia was still asleep on my backpack. Then I noticed that the hallway had changed. A few paces away there was now a plain wooden door in the wall. I slowly approached it. I put my ear to the door and I could hear what sounded like TV static and the low murmur of voices. I discreetly grabbed the door handle and turned it slowly. I felt the latch bolt clear and I carefully cracked the door just enough to peek inside. It was dark, so it took a second for me to register what I was seeing. I saw a small boardroom. A long table in the center was surrounded by seated men in suits. At the end of the table stood another man next to an old Kietz TV that was playing static. This was the only source of light in the room, and all the men around the table were turned towards the TV. Suddenly the screen flickered from static to a solid dark background. And some warped new age style music began playing. Then the words appeared on the screen that terrified me like nothing else before. In plain text the words read, "You will lose her." I froze as I knew these words were meant for me. I watched with terror as the men seated around the table slowly turned toward me in unison. They were mannequins. The TV screen then clicked off and they continued staring at me as I could barely make out their forms through the near-pitch darkness. I quickly pulled the door shut and whipped around to look at Mia. I had a horrible feeling of dread that when I turned around she would be gone, like the message on the TV promised. "Eric, what are you doing?" Mia was leaning up and staring at me. Thank God. There was Mia right where I left her. I pointed at the door and said, "This door appeared and I..." "What door?" she interrupted. I turned and sure enough the door was now gone. I explained what happened to her, but I left out the message that appeared on the screen. "You will lose her." Those words still burned in my brain. I tried to force them out. We drank water, ate granola and then got moving again. Hallways. Endless hallways. After a couple hours of walking we started to hear music. There were small speakers in the corners of the ceiling. I recognized it as the same new age music that played on the TV in the boardroom. The melody drilled into our minds. Combined with the dull aesthetics of the quiet hallways and the endless right turns, the music had a hypnotizing effect. The lengths of the halls became more uniform. That is to say, the straight section of hallway was about 7 paces, then a right turn, then 7 paces and a right turn. "I think we were walking in circles." "Are a square," Mia said. I looked at her and took out a bottle of water. I peeled off the plastic label and dropped it on the floor. Then we kept walking. 7 paces, right turn. 7 paces, right turn. 7 paces, right turn. And there it was. Mia was right. The label from my water bottle lay in the middle of the hallway. Somehow we had been led into a loop. I lost it. Foop. I kicked the wall repeatedly and screamed. Mia just leaned her back against the wall. This was our dynamic. If one of us lost it, the other became zen and thought of a solution. More often than not, I was the one to lose it. I finally stopped freaking out. "There has to be a way out." "A door," Mia said. "We would have seen it," I replied. "A hidden door," she said. She turned around and ran her hands along the cracks of the wood paneling. "Most likely on the outer wall," she said. She beat her fist on the wall, listening for a change in the sound. I exhaled heavily, sweating and tired, and I started searching the wall as well. We checked the whole first wall, nothing. We checked the second wall, nothing. The third, nothing. The final wall, nothing. I gave up and slumped on the floor. Mia immediately went over to the other side of the hall and started checking the inner wall. "What are you doing?" "I thought you said it would be on the outer wall," I asked. Then we heard it. Mia beat the wall and instead of the dead thud, we heard a resonate boom. Down to eat at the diner called Happy's Restaurant. They serve absolutely delicious human meat. I lost my job a couple months ago when the entire business I worked for abruptly went bankrupt and shut down. To make ends meet, I started driving for Uber late into the night. It was about 3:30 or 4 a.m. when I made the last drop-off on the night it happened. The passenger was a strange, quiet man with a greasy t-shirt. His brown eyes looked flat and dead. I glanced into the rearview mirror as I dropped him off at a Victorian house in the middle of nowhere, making sure he left my car so he could wander off and wear a mask made of human skin or whatever people like that did on their days off. The house looked like something from a horror movie, all sharp turrets and dark windows with a blood-red exterior. Dawn came early that day, a cancerous orange sky looming overhead. Needles of rain abruptly started falling sideways. Tired and hungry, I kept an eye out for somewhere to stop and eat as I drove through the filthy torrents of rain. I turned on the GPS for my apartment and sped through the dirty, empty streets of Frost Hollow. Dark, dead trees rose overhead on both sides of me. I drove on for a few minutes, seeing only a single house far back at the beginning of the road that entire time. I didn't know this area, so I was pleasantly surprised when a brightly lit diner appeared on my left. A blinking sign cheerily read Happy's Restaurant. The parking lot was entirely empty except for a truck that looked like it had been there for weeks. Leaves and dirt covered its windshield, and someone had written "Clean me" in the grime in giant letters. I heaved a deep yawn as I pulled into the parking lot. I tried to check my phone, but there was no internet or service all the way out here. I hoped they had Wi-Fi in the diner. Happy's restaurant had enormous plate glass windows wrapping around the sides and front of the restaurant. Light burst out onto the dark parking lot in harsh white streams as birds chirped in the forests around me, waking up to the new dawn. The architecture of the place looked straight out of the 1950s. I could imagine James Dean going there and chain-smoking cigarettes over a burger and a coffee. I got out of the car, heading over to the front of the restaurant where I lit a cigarette and inhaled deeply. The spicy menthol tobacco gave me a sudden jolt of energy. Blinking quickly, I smoked the cigarette as quickly as I could, feeling wide awake by the end of it. I stood under the canopy of the building, watching lightning erupt like missile flashes across the sky. The street remained dead and empty. I hadn't seen a single other person since I had dropped off the weirdo at the nearby Victorian house. I opened the glass door of the diner, hearing a bell ring overhead. I looked into the empty restaurant, seeing its sparkling clean tables. The smell of fresh coffee rose out in fragrant waves. Shrugging, I went down and sat at a table next to a TV in the corner. It was playing some local news channel. 2 patients of the Creepypasta psychiatric hospital were able to break out by taking a nurse hostage. They had apparently planned the attack for weeks, making homemade knives out of screws taken out of the walls and other contraband that went undetected. The nurse escaped soon after, uninjured but in clear distress. The facility is considered a maximum security hospital, with the majority of patients considered criminally insane and held until. "Hey, sorry bud, didn't see you there," a voice called out from the back of the empty restaurant. I jumped, turning to see who was speaking. A man came out in a streaked, dirty apron. He was incredibly fat, probably at least 300 or 400 pounds. 4 greasy chins hung down on his neck like the wattles of a rooster. He reminded me of a circus freak, a slug-like man whose heavy footsteps shook the ground as he approached my table. He had red hands like a butcher. His face, too, was beet red and covered in sweat, with a tiny nose in the middle and giant, rubbery lips. His name tag said, "Frank." "Morning," he mumbled. "What can I get for you?" "Our waiter never showed up, so I am the only guy here. I'll have to take your order and cook it if that's okay." I nodded happily. "Yeah, that's fine. I just want a coffee with extra cream and sugar and a Reuben with fries and an extra side of coleslaw." He wrote it down on a dirt-streaked pad he pulled from his apron, taking a very long time and writing as slowly as possible. I watched his face closely. He reminded me of a clown, but his eyes were gray, the color of steel. They seemed freezing cold, almost inhuman. There was nothing clownish about them. "Okay, bud, that'll be right up," he said, grinning down at me. His yellow teeth were covered in a thick layer of filmy grime. I noticed that some in the front were broken, as if he had a habit of getting his teeth knocked out in fights. He turned around, heading back into the kitchen in his strange, waddling gait. I wondered how Frank had gotten here. There was certainly no public transportation anywhere in this part of the state. But I figured he must have gotten dropped off. I looked down at my phone, hoping to find an open Wi-Fi connection to pass the time, but there was nothing here. Sighing, I looked around the restaurant. A creepy clown mannequin stood in the corner, holding a sign that read, "Be happy, eat those feelings away." Its red and white makeup was all sharp points and hard angles. Around its grinning mouth, the red paint formed into a pointed half-circle, accentuating the gleaming white teeth that shone between its thin lips. A few moments later, Frank came out with a steaming hot cup of coffee and a bowl of creamers and sugar packets. He plopped them down in front of me, grunting and ambling back towards the kitchen. I smelled the odor of roasting meat and cooking oil rising from the kitchen in delicious, aromatic waves. I couldn't wait for my Reuben. Out of all sandwiches in the history of sandwiches, I thought Reubens were probably the most delicious. The way the corned beef mixed with the Thousand Island dressing, sauerkraut and marble rye bread made it seem like those ingredients were made by God specifically to make such a divine sandwich. My stomach growled as I waited eagerly. I continued scanning the restaurant, listening to the hum of the TV next to me when I spotted what looked like spatters of blood in front of the swinging kitchen doors. I used to work in a restaurant when I was a teenager, a crappy little pizza place, and I remembered how the ground beef always came soaked in wet blood. I found it odd that no one had cleaned it up yet though. It looked dried and clotted, as if it had been there for days. The TV was still talking about the escaped mental patients when Frank brought out a giant plate of delicious, fragrant sandwich and golden fries. I could feel my mouth watering as he laid it out with a clunk on the table in front of me. "Enjoy, buddy," he said, giving me a sly wink. His fish-like lips formed into a faint half-smile. He turned away and I immediately dug in. The Reuben was probably the best Reuben I've ever tasted. The corned beef was perfectly cooked, the bread crisp and fresh. The fries were golden and had a nice, satisfying crunch. I wanted to compliment Frank, but he was nowhere to be seen. Shrugging, I finished the first half of my sandwich. As I got to the last bite, I noticed something odd and crunchy in the meat. I thought it was a coin or something at first. I immediately spit out the entire wad of half-chewed sandwich onto a napkin, looking down. In the middle of the meat sat a painted human fingernail. It was ripped off, the bottom jagged and sharp. At that moment, I felt a sudden urge to vomit. I sat there for a few seconds, simply staring, my mind racing in circles like a rat in a wheel. Was it a fake fingernail? How had it gotten into my sandwich? I picked it up, bringing it closer to my right eye. I saw black, clotted blood and thin strands of flesh still hanging from the bottom. It was definitely not fake. Rising quickly, I grabbed my car keys and phone off the table and started stumbling towards the door. There were no rational thoughts at that moment, just an insistent rising sense of panic and dread. That was the moment the lights at the diner cut out. An eerie, gurgling laugh floated out of the kitchen. The cancerous yellow light of the new day was filtering through the stormy clouds. I looked through the plate glass front door and saw a face peering in with wide, insane eyes. I recognized the man I had dropped off at the Victorian house down the road. He had carved a fresh question mark into his forehead sometime after I had last seen him. His face looked slack and empty as he stared inside, his dead, blank eyes roaming left and right, looking for someone, looking for me. In his right hand, I saw an enormous meat cleaver streaked with fresh, dripping blood. He raised a trembling left hand and started opening the door. In the darkness and silence of the diner, I could hear every sound amplified 1,000-fold, every drop of rain hitting the roof, every thudding beat of my heart, every tiny creaking of the door as it swung open. I heard the doors to the kitchen swinging open at the same moment. In terror, I frantically looked around, seeing the bathrooms only a few feet away in the corner of the restaurant. As silently as I could, I slunk towards them, afraid to look back. I ripped open the women's restroom door, peeking out as I closed it behind me. I could see the man holding the meat cleaver slowly creeping past the tables, bending over to check underneath them. I could hear him whispering to himself. "I must baptize them in the blood and send them out into the world," he muttered quietly. "Must find the blood, eat the body, drink the blood to see God." Silently, I closed the door and groped around in the dark until I found the lock. Inhaling deeply, I clicked it to the side. The subtle clicking noise seemed as loud as a gunshot in the silence. I took my cell phone out of my pocket and turned, seeing a scene from a nightmare. Corpses littered the floor of the bathroom. A waitress in a button-up vest sat up against the wall in a corner. She looked to be in her mid-20s with dark brown eyes, black hair and pale, creamy skin. Dozens of deep stab wounds gleamed in her chest and stomach. Her neck had been so deeply slashed that her head had nearly been decapitated. Even worse, I saw chunks of flesh cut out of her body, chunks from the meat of her cheeks, arms, legs and fingers. I suddenly had a very good idea of where the fingernail had come from and what I had been eating. I gagged, retching. Next to her sprawled the corpse of an old man in a business suit. His shirt and jacket had been ripped open and a giant question mark carved deeply into the loose skin of his bird-like chest. Stuck in one eye, I saw the gleam of a wicked butcher's knife. It had sliced the eye in half, the blade disappearing deeply into his brain and skull. The other eye stared glassily up at the ceiling. I heard a light tapping at the bathroom door, a kind of polite knocking that someone might use if they were wondering if it was occupied. I was afraid to breathe. I spun, looking at the wooden door, the only thing standing between me and certain death at this moment. "Is anyone in there?" A low, raspy voice asked, the same voice that had mumbled about drinking blood. "Occupado." "Hey, what the fuck you doing?" the gruff voice of Frank asked. "Did you find him?" His tone rose into one of utter excitement, like a child on his way to Disney World. "The bathroom is locked," replied. "I think we got a little lamb in there, ready for the slaughter." "Ready for the grill, you mean?" Frank said, giving an insane laugh that reminded me of the coldness of empty space. I turned, running over to the old man's corpse. The game was up, I knew. I wrapped my hands around the sticky, blood-coated handle of the butcher's knife. I started pulling up, but it was firmly implanted in the old man's skull. At that moment, I heard a sound that sent waves of terror dancing up my spine, the sound of keys jingling in a lock. A rush of adrenaline made the world brighten and my vision turn white in the harsh glare of the phone's light. I laid the phone down on the top of the toilet and with all of my strength yanked up on the knife. There was a cracking noise, then a wet sucking sound as cold blood sprayed my face and neck. The knife slipped out in a rush, sending me flying back. At that moment the door flew open. Frank and Question Mark stood there, side by side, two grinning lunatics with knives in their hands. The orange light from the sunrise dimly illuminated their silhouettes. They looked over to where the cell phone lay on the toilet, not seeing me leaning against the back wall, breathing heavily in an animal panic. Before they had time to react, I ran forwards, the blade facing out towards my attackers. Question Mark turned towards me at the last second as I brought the knife into his throat. It sliced easily into the flesh. His eyes widened in pain and surprise as he gurgled, choking on his own blood. He tried to bring the meat cleaver up, but his foot slipped on the slick blood coating the floor. I yanked the knife back out, turning to Frank. I saw a flash of metal and felt something pierce deeply into the side of my stomach. A roaring pain like acid burned its way through my flesh. Screaming as warm spurts of blood shot from the stab wound, I ran at Frank with the last of my energy, stabbing upwards into his belly and aiming at his aorta in the center. We fell into each other, both critically injured. The blood burst from his ruptured artery, spurting like a fire hose with each rapid beat of his heart. His eyes rolled up in his head as he fell back, landing on the corpse of Question Mark. Staggering and leaning against the wall, I tried making my way towards the front of the store but felt the energy draining out of me like water through a sieve. Waves of agony crashed through my body, taking my breath away. I collapsed to my knees, crawling slowly towards salvation. Frothy bubbles of blood flowed over my lips as I coughed, choking. I heard sirens in the distance, approaching rapidly. It sounded like dozens of police cars were heading in our direction. Screaming and crying, I dragged myself towards the front door, leaving warm streaks of blood smeared across the restaurant floor. The gurgling death gasp of Frank rattled noisily behind me. I could feel my life draining out of the deep stab wound in the side of my stomach. As I reached the door, police cars came into the restaurant parking lot with a screeching of tires. Men began running out with their guns drawn. The world went black as I reached up towards the door, wanting only to get out of this restaurant and never see this town again. I woke up in the hospital a couple days later. Emergency surgery had stopped the bleeding and many blood transfusions had saved my life. Police were waiting around my bed as I regained consciousness, frantic to ask me questions. I told them I didn't know anything, that I had just stopped at the restaurant to eat and gotten attacked. We had gotten multiple missing persons reports over the last couple weeks, the gruff homicide detective with a face like a bulldog said, but we didn't connect the victims to the diner until the day we found you there. Both of the escaped patients are dead though, thanks to you. He patted me on the shoulder. I shook my head, too weary to respond. If only they had investigated sooner, I could have avoided this entire nightmare. But then again, I wouldn't have tasted the best Reuben sandwich in the universe either. Don't eat at the diner called Happy's Restaurant. They serve absolutely delicious human meat. I lost my job a couple months ago when the entire business I worked for abruptly went bankrupt and shut down. To make ends meet, I started driving for Uber late into the night. It was about 3:30 or 4 a.m. when I made the last drop-off on the night it happened. The passenger was a strange, quiet man with a greasy t-shirt. His brown eyes looked flat and dead. I glanced into the rearview mirror as I dropped him off at a Victorian house in the middle of nowhere, making sure he left my car so he could wander off and wear a mask made of human skin or whatever people like that did on their days off. The house looked like something from a horror movie, all sharp turrets and dark windows with a blood-red exterior. Dawn came early that day, a cancerous orange sky looming overhead. Needles of rain abruptly started falling sideways. Tired and hungry, I kept an eye out for somewhere to stop and eat as I drove through the filthy torrents of rain. I turned on the GPS for my apartment and sped through the dirty, empty streets of Frost Hollow. Dark, dead trees rose overhead on both sides of me. I drove on for a few minutes, seeing only a single house far back at the beginning of the road that entire time. I didn't know this area, so I was pleasantly surprised when a brightly lit diner appeared on my left. A blinking sign cheerily read Happy's Restaurant. The parking lot was entirely empty except for a truck that looked like it had been there for weeks. Leaves and dirt covered its windshield, and someone had written "Clean me" in the grime in giant letters. I heaved a deep yawn as I pulled into the parking lot. I tried to check my phone, but there was no internet or service all the way out here. I hoped they had Wi-Fi in the diner. Happy's Restaurant had enormous plate glass windows wrapping around the sides and front of the restaurant. Light burst out onto the dark parking lot in harsh white streams as birds chirped in the forests around me, waking up to the new dawn. The architecture of the place looked straight out of the 1950s. I could imagine James Dean going there and chain-smoking cigarettes over a burger and a coffee. I got out of the car, heading over to the front of the restaurant where I lit a cigarette and inhaled deeply. The spicy menthol tobacco gave me a sudden jolt of energy. Blinking quickly, I smoked the cigarette as quickly as I could, feeling wide awake by the end of it. I stood under the canopy of the building, watching lightning erupt like missile flashes across the sky. The street remained dead and empty. I hadn't seen a single other person since I had dropped off the weirdo at the nearby Victorian house. I opened the glass door of the diner, hearing a bell ring overhead. I looked into the empty restaurant, seeing its sparkling clean tables. The smell of fresh coffee rose out in fragrant waves. Shrugging, I went down and sat at a table next to a TV in the corner. It was playing some local news channel. 2 patients of the Creepypasta psychiatric hospital were able to break out by taking a nurse hostage. They had apparently planned the attack for weeks, making homemade knives out of screws taken out of the walls and other contraband that went undetected. The nurse escaped soon after, uninjured but in clear distress. The facility is considered a maximum security hospital, with the majority of patients considered criminally insane and held until. "Hey, sorry bud, didn't see you there," a voice called out from the back of the empty restaurant. I jumped, turning to see who was speaking. A man came out in a streaked, dirty apron. He was incredibly fat, probably at least 300 or 400 pounds. 4 greasy chins hung down on his neck like the wattles of a rooster. He reminded me of a circus freak, a slug-like man whose heavy footsteps shook the ground as he approached my table. He had red hands like a butcher. His face, too, was beet red and covered in sweat, with a tiny nose in the middle and giant, rubbery lips. His name tag said, "Frank." "Morning," he mumbled. "What can I get for you?" "Our waiter never showed up, so I am the only guy here. I'll have to take your order and cook it if that's okay." I nodded happily. "Yeah, that's fine. I just want a coffee with extra cream and sugar and a Reuben with fries and an extra side of coleslaw." He wrote it down on a dirt street pad he pulled from his apron, taking a very long time and writing as slowly as possible. I watched his face closely. He reminded me of a clown, but his eyes were gray, the color of steel. They seemed freezing cold, almost inhuman. There was nothing clownish about them. "Okay, bud, that'll be right up," he said, grinning down at me. His yellow teeth were covered in a thick layer of filmy grime. I noticed that some in the front were broken, as if he had a habit of getting his teeth knocked out in fights. He turned around, heading back into the kitchen in his strange, waddling gait. I wondered how Frank had gotten here. There was certainly no public transportation anywhere in this part of the state. But I figured he must have gotten dropped off. I looked down at my phone, hoping to find an open Wi-Fi connection to pass the time, but there was nothing here. Sighing, I looked around the restaurant. A creepy clown mannequin stood in the corner, holding a sign that read, "Be happy, eat those feelings away." Its red and white makeup was all sharp points and hard angles. Around its grinning mouth, the red paint formed into a pointed half-circle, accentuating the gleaming white teeth that shone between its thin lips. A few moments later, Frank came out with a steaming hot cup of coffee and a bowl of creamers and sugar packets. He plopped them down in front of me, grunting and ambling back towards the kitchen. I smelled the odor of roasting meat and cooking oil rising from the kitchen in delicious, aromatic waves. I couldn't wait for my Reuben. Out of all sandwiches in the history of sandwiches, I thought Reubens were probably the most delicious. The way the corned beef mixed with the Thousand Island dressing, sauerkraut and marble rye bread made it seem like those ingredients were made by God specifically to make such a divine sandwich. My stomach growled as I waited eagerly. I continued scanning the restaurant, listening to the hum of the TV next to me when I spotted what looked like spatters of blood in front of the swinging kitchen doors. I used to work in a restaurant when I was a teenager, a crappy little pizza place, and I remembered how the ground beef always came soaked in wet blood. I found it odd that no one had cleaned it up yet though. It looked dried and clotted, as if it had been there for days. The TV was still talking about the escaped mental patients when Frank brought out a giant plate of delicious, fragrant sandwich and golden fries. I could feel my mouth watering as he laid it out with a clunk on the table in front of me. "Enjoy, buddy," he said, giving me a sly wink. His fish-like lips formed into a faint half-smile. He turned away and I immediately dug in. The Reuben was probably the best Reuben I've ever tasted. The corned beef was perfectly cooked, the bread crisp and fresh. The fries were golden and had a nice, satisfying crunch. I wanted to compliment Frank, but he was nowhere to be seen. Shrugging, I finished the first half of my sandwich. As I got to the last bite, I noticed something odd and crunchy in the meat. I thought it was a coin or something at first. I immediately spit out the entire wad of half-chewed sandwich onto a napkin, looking down. In the middle of the meat sat a painted human fingernail. It was ripped off, the bottom jagged and sharp. At that moment, I felt a sudden urge to vomit. I sat there for a few seconds, simply staring, my mind racing in circles like a rat in a wheel. Was it a fake fingernail? How had it gotten into my sandwich? I picked it up, bringing it closer to my right eye. I saw black, clotted blood and thin strands of flesh still hanging from the bottom. It was definitely not fake. Rising quickly, I grabbed my car keys and phone off the table and started stumbling towards the door. There were no rational thoughts at that moment, just an insistent rising sense of panic and dread. That was the moment the lights at the diner cut out. An eerie, gurgling laugh floated out of the kitchen. The cancerous yellow light of the new day was filtering through the stormy clouds. I looked through the plate glass front door and saw a face peering in with wide, insane eyes. I recognized the man I had dropped off at the Victorian house down the road. He had carved a fresh question mark into his forehead sometime after I had last seen him. His face looked slack and empty as he stared inside, his dead, blank eyes roaming left and right, looking for someone, looking for me. In his right hand, I saw an enormous meat cleaver streaked with fresh, dripping blood. He raised a trembling left hand and started opening the door. In the darkness and silence of the diner, I could hear every sound amplified 1,000-fold, every drop of rain hitting the roof, every thudding beat of my heart, every tiny creaking of the door as it swung open. I heard the doors to the kitchen swinging open at the same moment. In terror, I frantically looked around, seeing the bathrooms only a few feet away in the corner of the restaurant. As silently as I could, I slunk towards them, afraid to look back. I ripped open the women's restroom door, peeking out as I closed it behind me. I could see the man holding the meat cleaver slowly creeping past the tables, bending over to check underneath them. I could hear him whispering to himself. "I must baptize them in the blood and send them out into the world," he muttered quietly. "Must find the blood, eat the body, drink the blood to see God." Silently, I closed the door and groped around in the dark until I found the lock. Inhaling deeply, I clicked it to the side. The subtle clicking noise seemed as loud as a gunshot in the silence. I took my cell phone out of my pocket and turned, seeing a scene from a nightmare. Corpses littered the floor of the bathroom. A waitress in a button-up vest sat up against the wall in a corner. She looked to be in her mid-20s with dark brown eyes, black hair and pale, creamy skin. Dozens of deep stab wounds gleamed in her chest and stomach. Her neck had been so deeply slashed that her head had nearly been decapitated. Even worse, I saw chunks of flesh cut out of her body, chunks from the meat of her cheeks, arms, legs and fingers. I suddenly had a very good idea of where the fingernail had come from and what I had been eating. I gagged, retching. Next to her sprawled the corpse of an old man in a business suit. His shirt and jacket had been ripped open and a giant question mark carved deeply into the loose skin of his bird-like chest. Stuck in one eye, I saw the gleam of a wicked butcher's knife. It had sliced the eye in half, the blade disappearing deeply into his brain and skull. The other eye stared glassily up at the ceiling. I heard a light tapping at the bathroom door, a kind of polite knocking that someone might use if they were wondering if it was occupied. I was afraid to breathe. I spun, looking at the wooden door, the only thing standing between me and certain death at this moment. "Is anyone in there?" A low, raspy voice asked, the same voice that had mumbled about drinking blood. "Occupado." "Hey, what the fuck you doing?" the gruff voice of Frank asked. "Did you find him?" His tone rose into one of utter excitement, like a child on his way to Disney World. "The bathroom is locked?" replied. "I think we got a little lamb in there, ready for the slaughter." "Ready for the grill, you mean?" Frank said, giving an insane laugh that reminded me of the coldness of empty space. I turned, running over to the old man's corpse. The game was up, I knew. I wrapped my hands around the sticky, blood-coated handle of the butcher's knife. I started pulling up, but it was firmly implanted in the old man's skull. At that moment, I heard a sound that sent waves of terror dancing up my spine, the sound of keys jingling in a lock. A rush of adrenaline made the world brighten and my vision turn white in the harsh glare of the phone's light. I laid the phone down on the top of the toilet and with all of my strength yanked up on the knife. There was a cracking noise, then a wet sucking sound as cold blood sprayed my face and neck. The knife slipped out in a rush, sending me flying back. At that moment the door flew open. Frank and stood there, side by side, two grinning lunatics with knives in their hands. The orange light from the sunrise dimly illuminated their silhouettes. They looked over to where the cell phone lay on the toilet, not seeing me leaning against the back wall, breathing heavily in an animal panic. Before they had time to react, I ran forwards, the blade facing out towards my attackers. Turned towards me at the last second as I brought the knife into his throat. It sliced easily into the flesh. His eyes widened in pain and surprise as he gurgled, choking on his own blood. He tried to bring the meat cleaver up, but his foot slipped on the slick blood coating the floor. I yanked the knife back out, turning to Frank. I saw a flash of metal and felt something pierce deeply into the side of my stomach. A roaring pain like acid burned its way through my flesh. Screaming as warm spurts of blood shot from the stab wound, I ran at Frank with the last of my energy, stabbing upwards into his belly and aiming at his aorta in the center. We fell into each other, both critically injured. The blood burst from his ruptured artery, spurting like a fire hose with each rapid beat of his heart. His eyes rolled up in his head as he fell back, landing on the corpse of ? Staggering and leaning against the wall, I tried making my way towards the front of the store, but felt the energy draining out of me like water through a sieve. Waves of agony crashed through my body, taking my breath away. I collapsed to my knees, crawling slowly towards salvation. Frothy bubbles of blood flowed over my lips as I coughed, choking. I heard sirens in the distance, approaching rapidly. It sounded like dozens of police cars were heading in our direction. Screaming and crying, I dragged myself towards the front door, leaving warm streaks of blood smeared across the restaurant floor. The gurgling death gasp of Frank rattled noisily behind me. I could feel my life draining out of the deep stab wound in the side of my stomach. As I reached the door, police cars came into the restaurant parking lot with a screeching of tires. Men began running out with their guns drawn. The world went black as I reached up towards the door, wanting only to get out of this restaurant and never see this town again. I woke up in the hospital a couple days later. Emergency surgery had stopped the bleeding and many blood transfusions had saved my life. Police were waiting around my bed as I regained consciousness, frantic to ask me questions. I told them I didn't know anything, that I had just stopped at the restaurant to eat and gotten attacked. We had gotten multiple missing persons reports over the last couple weeks, the gruff homicide detective with a face like a bulldog said, but we didn't connect the victims to the diner until the day we found you there. Both of the escaped patients are dead though, thanks to you. He patted me on the shoulder. I shook my head, too weary to respond. If only they had investigated sooner, I could have avoided this entire nightmare. But then again, I wouldn't have tasted the best Reuben sandwich in the universe either. If you see yourself in the woods, run. The reason I'll never take my son camping again. Jake, my 11-year-old son, blindsided me one day when he asked if we could go camping. I nearly spit out my lukewarm coffee in surprise. This was coming from the same kid who complained about the sun's brightness at soccer practice and whined about mosquitoes at night. So when he suddenly expressed interest in camping, I couldn't help but chuckle. It was such a far cry from his usual pastime of being glued to anything with a screen. We were hanging out by my truck one morning talking about school when Jake first mentioned camping. He nudged a pebble along the dry road, his gaze fixed on the ground. Hey Dad, he began hesitantly, think we could go camping sometime? I couldn't help but grin from ear to ear. Apparently Jake's friend Daniel had been endlessly bragging about a camping trip he went on with his dad, making the great outdoors suddenly irresistible to my screen-obsessed son. Camping, huh? I said, trying to contain my excitement. Sounds great, but it's not all fireflies and s'mores. There's bugs, for one thing. Lots of 'em. Jake grimaced, his enthusiasm briefly dimming. Yeah, I know, he mumbled, kicking at the dirt with his sneakers. I gave him a playful nudge. If the weather holds, maybe we can just find a good spot by the lake next weekend. Just you and me. You up for it? Yeah, Jake said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. His response to the lake idea didn't seem genuine.
A subtle shrug and a glimmer of disappointment in his eyes revealed his desire for a more immersive experience, one that involved tents, campfires, and a genuine escape into nature.
Merely visiting the lake wouldn't cut it. Only a true camping trip would satisfy him. Truth be told, I hadn't been camping in years. Fond memories of childhood fishing trips and backyard campouts with my own dad felt like a lifetime ago. Work had a way of taking over, and lately it had been consuming more than its fair share. But after listening to Jake's retelling of Daniel's camping trip story, it had stirred something in me, a friendly rivalry. I was suddenly determined to one-up Daniel and his dad, to make sure my boy had the camping trip of a lifetime. A grin spread wide across my face as I promised Jake, yeah, you know what, Jake? We're gonna go camping, and it's going to be the best camping trip ever. As soon as I can take a break from work, we'll go. Jake's excitement was contagious. He jumped up and down with joy and I couldn't help but laugh. It hit me then that I probably should have introduced him to camping sooner. "Thank you, Dad," he shouted, his voice ringing with gratitude. "Thank you, Dad. Thank you." I gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "All right, champ, let us simmer down a bit," I chuckled. "Head inside and get started on your homework. We don't want Mom holding this over our heads," I added with a wink. Jake nodded eagerly and practically skipped into the house, leaving me with a warm sense of fatherly pride. The weeks flew by and I finally managed to snag some time off work. In the evenings, I'd pore over articles and videos on wilderness survival and the delicate art of s'more making. My childhood camping memories were more fuzzy nostalgia than concrete know-how, and I couldn't let my lack of experience show, not in front of Jake, and certainly not in front of the Daniel. Meanwhile, my ever-supportive wife, Sarah, decided to forego the mosquitoes and campfire smoke for the comfort of our home. She said it was girl time with a good book and a long bath, but I couldn't help but sense a hint of amusement in her eyes. "Traitor," I'd jokingly tease, reminding her of our grand mission to outshine Daniel and his dad's camping trip. She'd just laugh and say, "Go conquer the wilderness, honey. I'll be here holding down the fort." It was true that Sarah wasn't exactly an outdoors enthusiast. She enjoyed a leisurely stroll in the park, but multi-day camping trips weren't her cup of tea. Still, I knew she secretly loved seeing Jake and me bond, and deep down, I hoped this man versus wild adventure might reignite my own forgotten love for the outdoors. My mission? Mastering the art of building a fire that wouldn't leave us all choking on smoke, identifying constellations for Jake, hoping I wouldn't mix up Orion with the Big Dipper, and maybe even catching a fish or two, although, based on my past fishing experiences, that might be the biggest challenge of all. It was time to put my crash course in wilderness survival to the test and create an unforgettable camping trip for Jake, one that even Daniel and his dad couldn't top. At last, the weekend we'd been waiting for arrived. That Friday, as I picked Jake up from school, excitement buzzed through the car as we pulled into the driveway.
The moment we stepped through the front door, Jake's eyes widened in amazement at the sight of the camping gear I had meticulously, or so I thought, laid out for him like a treasure trove for an intrepid explorer.
The living room had transformed into a chaotic staging ground for our trip. A giant green tent bag rested at his feet, while two mismatched sleeping bags, one a vivid orange, the other in subdued camouflage, leaned precariously against the table. Beside two overstuffed backpacks, I'd proudly displayed a bounty of rations, mostly marshmallows, chocolate bars, and enough instant ramen to feed a small army. "Ready to conquer the wild with me?" I asked. Jake didn't disappoint. His eyes sparkled with an unspoken thrill that seemed to shout, "I can't wait to tell Daniel I went camping too." With the car packed to the brim and threatening to keel over at any sharp turn, Sarah pulled me aside just before we left. Her usually bright and playful eyes held a seriousness that cut through my usual humor. "Please, be careful out there," she said, her voice tinged with worry. I knew this wasn't the moment for jokes. Squeezing her hand, I gave her a reassuring nod. "We'll be fine," I promised, hoping my confident smile would hide any lingering anxieties about my own lack of camping expertise. Jake and I settled into the car, the engine rumbling with the promise of adventure. Determined to make Daniel and his dad's Crystal Lake camping trip look like a backyard picnic, I scoured maps and forums for the perfect spot. Jake had mentioned that Daniel and his father had gone camping at the Crystal Lake campgrounds, conveniently close to our town. Crystal Lake? I teased, as if it were the last place any self-respecting outdoorsman would pitch a tent. "We're going somewhere way better," I added with a wink. Our destination was Whisperwood Forest, a hidden camping ground 3 hours north. As the miles stretched before us, Jake peppered me with questions, his enthusiasm keeping the energy high. "Are there bears in Whisperwood?" he asked, eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. "Maybe," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant, though a flicker of unease ran through me. The forums did mention some black bear sightings. "But that's why we have all this camping gear, right? To be prepared for anything." Jake's questions ranged from the practical, "Will there be a bathroom?" to the fantastical, "Do you think we'll see Bigfoot?" By the time the landscape outside our window blurred into a patchwork of greens and browns, his voice had grown hoarse and a peaceful silence settled over the car. We veered off the main road, following the rhythm of a narrow dirt path snaking through the dense forest. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the thick canopy overhead, casting long, dancing shadows on the dusty track. The air hung heavy with the earthy scent of damp moss and decaying leaves, punctuated by the occasional chirp of an unseen bird. With every bend and dip, the car swayed alongside us, its tires crunching on loose gravel. I caught a glimpse of Jake in the rearview mirror, his head bobbing with every bump, his eyes wide with anticipation and fixed on the passing scenery. After about 20 minutes, we emerged into a small clearing, the sudden brightness of unfiltered sunlight momentarily blinding me. As my eyes adjusted, I took in the scene. The clearing was modest in size, about the size of a tennis court. In its center stood a gnarled oak, its branches reaching out like skeletal arms. An eerie silence enveloped the area, interrupted only by the rustle of leaves in the still air. I brought the car to a gentle stop, the engine sighing softly as it died. Jake's eyes sparkled with anticipation as he looked over at me. "Ready?" I asked, my voice echoing in the sudden stillness. His nod was eager and swift. As I stepped out, my joints popped like distant firecrackers. I retrieved our backpacks from the trunk and hoisted the tent onto my shoulder, its weight familiar and grounding. I let Jake take the lead as we scouted for a camping spot. I knew it was important for him to feel like the captain of our adventure, the leader of our expedition. Watching his determined strides and furrowed brow as he surveyed the land like a seasoned explorer was hilarious. Eventually, we found a suitable spot, or rather, my son did, tucked away from the car and hidden by thick underbrush. Sunlight danced through the leaves, casting dappled patterns on a carpet of moss and ferns. Nearby, a crystal-clear stream burbled, its melody harmonizing with the chirping symphony of unseen insects. It was a secluded paradise, the perfect refuge for me and my son, nestled away from the world within the forest's embrace. With a proud grin, Jake declared our campsite found. While he scampered off to explore the nearby stream, I tackled the seemingly straightforward task of pitching the tent. However, the instructions were akin to cryptic hieroglyphs, filled with diagrams resembling abstract art and terminology that would challenge even a seasoned scholar. 20 minutes later, after much head-scratching and muttered curses, the tent stood, albeit with a noticeable lean to one side. "Behold," I announced, trying to hide the beads of sweat gathering on my forehead. Jake, ever the diplomat, simply grinned. "Coolest tent ever, Dad." As we unrolled our sleeping bags inside the tent, I sent Jake on a mission to gather sticks for our fire. He scampered off into the undergrowth while I patrolled the edge of the woods, collecting stray logs to bolster our firewood stash. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a figure peeking from behind a tree, but dismissed it as a trick of the fading light. Igniting a fire, often portrayed in movies with a single dramatic swipe of a flint, turned into a comedic ballet of fumbled matches and stubborn kindling. My attempts at channeling my inner caveman were met with sputtering defiance from the damp sticks. After 20 minutes of frustration, I surrendered to the ease of modern technology and pulled a lighter from my backpack. As if sensing my defeat, the fire roared to life with a satisfying crackle. I called Jake back, and together we roasted marshmallows under the shifting hues of the evening sky. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky with fiery shades of orange and red, we shared stories and laughter, leaving behind the worries of city life for the simple joy of being together in the wild. As the clock neared 9 p.m., exhaustion settled over us like a warm blanket. Jake, his eyelids drooping like weighted curtains, readily agreed it was bedtime. I subdued the fire with a few nudges from my boot, but instead of fading completely, the embers seemed to pulse with an unnatural inner light, casting dancing shadows across the forest floor. The usual nighttime sounds of crickets and rustling leaves took on an unsettling tone. A distant howl pierced the silence, long and mournful, similar to an owl's call yet somehow different from any I'd heard before. A chill ran down my spine, prompting me to pull Jake closer and tuck him snugly into his sleeping bag. "Just an owl, champ," I reassured him, trying to sound confident despite my unease. My voice echoed strangely inside the tent, adding to the eerie atmosphere, but Jake, already drifting off to sleep, remained unfazed. Before I knew it, my eyes had closed and I'd drifted off. It felt like no time had passed before a soft nudge at my shoulder stirred me awake. Squinting in the dark, I made out Jake sitting bolt upright, looking at me. "What's wrong?" I mumbled, my voice heavy with sleep. "Chach," he whispered, his voice trembling. "There's something outside." Half asleep, I assured him it was probably just a squirrel or a similar creature and encouraged him to try and sleep. I turned onto my side, seeking the comforting embrace of sleep once more. But before it could claim me again, I heard it, a sequence of sounds distinct from the forest's usual symphony. Footsteps, deliberate and measured footsteps, circled our tent. These weren't the light steps of a deer or the clumsy thudding of a bear. There was no natural rhythm to them, no telltale snap of a twig. They were silent, calculated movements, 2 steps, a pause, 2 more steps, a pause, as if whatever lurked outside was deliberately trying to be quiet. 2 minutes stretched into an eternity before the pattern resumed, 2 deliberate steps, a pause, and then 2 more steps. Wiping the sleep from my eyes, I propped myself up. A glance at Jake confirmed he was still awake, his eyes wide with terror. In a hushed tone, I promised to investigate. He gave a small nod, and with a deep breath I inched forward, my hand trembling as I unzipped the tent just a crack. Peering through the gap, I found the darkness outside impenetrable, the only light source being the faint embers of our extinguished campfire. Squinting, I strained to see beyond the flickering red glow. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I saw a figure near the tree line, a subtle shift in the shadows that seemed to move on silent feet. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving me questioning my tired sanity. Turning back to Jake, I forced a reassuring smile. "Everything's okay, champ. Go back to sleep." Whatever lurked outside wasn't any creature I recognized, and it showed no signs of leaving. As we settled back into our sleeping bags, a sudden noise shattered the silence, jolting me awake. It wasn't the familiar rustle of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl. This was a sharp crack, a deep, resonant snap of a fallen branch, weighty and too close for comfort. A cold sweat instantly coated my skin. Whatever had caused that sound was heavy. Quietly, I rose from my sleeping bag, the tent floor feeling small and exposed beneath me. Retrieving my flashlight, I unzipped the tent fully with deliberate care. The chilly night air rushed in, stealing my breath momentarily. With trembling hands, I switched on the flashlight and swept its beam across the surrounding woods. The once familiar trees now loomed ominously in the darkness. Shadows danced and twisted in the flickering light, playing tricks on my already rattled mind. I scanned the forest floor for any sign of the creature, a footprint, a snapped twig, but found nothing. Yet, just beyond the flashlight's reach, a glimmer caught my eye, a subtle movement, a flash of reflection. I focused the beam in the direction, my heart pounding, but saw only the swaying branches of a nearby pine. Convinced the source of the noise was ahead of me, I had turned away from the tent. However, the sound of leaves crunching behind me shattered that assumption. Whirling around, I aimed the flashlight toward the tent, partially illuminating my son, who sat upright with a confused expression. Whatever had made the noise remained out of sight. I had almost convinced myself it was merely a curious animal nosing around behind our tent. Just as I was about to dismiss the fear and retreat into the safety of the tent, ready to label the sounds as harmless, the source of the noise revealed itself, a moment that stretched my sanity thin. It stood up from behind the opposite end of the tent, where it had been hiding. Me. Standing over the tent, partially bathed in the weak glow of my flashlight, it defied all logic and reason. Even as I stared directly at it, my mind struggled to accept what my eyes were seeing. It wasn't an animal, as I had initially assumed. It was me. I found myself locked in a gaze with myself. It had my face, but it wasn't me. Its limbs extended from misaligned joints at the shoulders, longer and more spindly than mine. Though humanoid in shape, its proportions were wrong, its limbs extending at unnatural angles. Clad in tattered clothes akin to my camping attire, its body seemed like a grotesque mirror image of my own. The most unsettling part was its face. It mirrored mine in almost every detail, save for the eyes, voids of absolute blackness in place of my familiar brown eyes. When caught in the beam of my flashlight, those eyes revealed twin specks of light within the darkness, staring back at me with an unnerving intensity. A single glance revealed its formidable strength, far surpassing my own. Its arms, thick with sinewy muscle, bore the unmistakable markings of a life lived in the wilderness. These were not the sculpted muscles of a gym-goer, but the rugged strength forged by the trials of nature itself. Mountains climbed, rivers crossed, battles waged against the elements. As its mouth contorted grotesquely across its face, the skin splitting like parched earth, a wet tearing filled the night air, an agonizing sound that sent a primal scream echoing through my mind. The chill of the night was now a distant memory, replaced by a fear so profound it threatened to immobilize me. Suddenly, a voice pierced the silence, a small, vulnerable voice belonging to Jake, calling out from within the tent, asking if I could see anything. At the sound of his voice, the creature's attention shifted sharply toward the tent. It leaned in, drawn by Jake's innocence. Its already unnaturally wide mouth stretched further, the lower jaw unhinging to an impossible length, revealing a menacing row of needle-like teeth. The thing raised its elongated arm, which moved unnervingly stiff and jerky, like the movements of someone who hadn't felt flesh beneath their fingertips for years. I could see each joint crackle and pop as it extended its arm. I was confused as to what it was doing, but then realization hit me. Instinct took over. I plunged my hands into the tent, grabbing Jake, and yanked him out with all my strength. Yanking him from the tent, we stumbled out, the ground a sickening blur beneath my feet. We landed in a heap, the sound of ripping fabric filling the air as the creature tore through the tent like a child ripping through tissue paper. The metallic tang of blood, sharp and acrid, filled my nostrils. I covered Jake's mouth with my hand, feeling his tears against my skin. We lay there in silence, watching the thing eviscerate our tent. Amidst the chaos, my bag was flung towards us. Recognizing it, I rummaged through it until my fingers closed around the car keys. Leaning close to Jake, I told him when I gave the signal, I wanted him to run for the car. In the tense silence that followed the creature's assault, a distant noise momentarily captured its attention. Seizing the opportunity, I whispered to Jake, "Run." We sprang up and bolted towards the car, the creature's piercing shriek chasing us from behind. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but I pushed on, fueled by a primal urge to protect my son. Reaching the car, I fumbled with the keys, the creature's rasping breaths hot on my neck. With a satisfying click, the door unlocked. We tumbled inside, slamming the doors shut just as the creature lunged forward, its fingers scraping against the metal. With trembling hands, I turned the key in the ignition, the engine roaring to life. In the dim light, I could see the creature standing mere inches from the car, its grotesque smile contorted in what seemed to be frustration. With a surge of adrenaline, I shifted into reverse, then spun the car around, tires churning the earth as we sped down the trail. We didn't stop until we got home. Throughout the drive, Jake remained silent, his soft sobs a stark contrast to my own stifled emotions. That night marked the end of our camping trips. It doesn't look like I'll be beating Daniel and his dad's camping trip anytime soon. Has anyone heard of Ashwood Hollow, Iowa? As the title suggests, I am looking for Ashwood Hollow, Iowa. I grew up there. It is a small unincorporated town a good hour and a half from the nearest bigger city. By bigger city I mean one with a Walmart. Ashwood Hollow didn't have much going for it when I was growing up. Mostly farmers who congregated together during the Great Depression to try to commune life their way out of poverty. Didn't really work. Kept kicking though. Until recently, it seems. Summer break was coming up soon and I decided to go visit my family. It is a long drive from Columbia to Ashwood Hollow, so I planned on leaving first thing after my finals. But when I had my Tacoma packed and filled up with gas, something strange happened. My phone's GPS wouldn't navigate to Ashwood Hollow. At first I just assumed it was my reception, so I got out of my truck and walked back into my dorm to use the Wi-Fi. My roommate, Mike, sat at his desk playing some shooter game I didn't care to pay attention to. "You're back early," he mutters, flicking his mouse across his mousepad. "Haven't left yet?" I reply, my eyes fixed on my phone screen that still reads unable to locate. "Mind if I look something up on your computer for a sec? My phone is acting up." "Sure," Mike says unenthusiastically. He alt-tabs out of his game and gets out of his chair. I type Ashwood Hollow, Iowa into the search bar, hoping to just click on directions and print it out. But when the screen loads on the slow school internet, Ashwood Hollow is nowhere to be found. Instead, there's just some Iowa Department of Natural Resources website talking about some park. What the heck? I mutter under my breath. I glance back at Mike, who looks puzzled. He leans closer to the monitor and lets out a soundless chuckle. "Bro, why are you going to Iowa? I thought you were going home." "I am going home. I am from Iowa. Do you not remember?" I rise out of his chair, giving the computer back to Mike. "You said you were from California, dude," Mike argues, taking a seat back in his chair. No. I am pretty sure I told you I am from Iowa." I mutter, glancing back at my phone with the unable to locate still displayed, almost taunting me. Whatever. It is not that deep. Mike tabs back into his game, leaving myself and Ashwood Hollow behind. I stare at Mike for just a moment. I could have sworn I put down my hometown in that stupid icebreaker that the raw made my entire haul do. That is how I found out that the guy who lives in 1304 is from Iowa too. I guess it wouldn't hurt to ask him if he happens to know which exit I need to take to get to Ashwood Hollow. I know the rest of the way there if I can just get to the dang exit. I push out into the hall, nearly bumping into Sarah, the librarian's assistant, as she was heading towards the exit. I quickly apologize and slip past her towards 1304. I bang on the door pretty loudly because if I remember correctly, the guy usually listens to loud music. After a few moments, the door creaks open, revealing Ryan's pale face. He doesn't seem too thrilled to see me. "What do you need, Parker?" he grumbles. "Hey, sorry to bother you. Wait, did I wake you up?" "Yes," he groans. "Oh. Sorry. Anyway, you're from Iowa, right?" "Yeah, why?" "You know where Ashwood Hollow is?" Ryan looks confused, almost annoyed. "No. Are you talking about that reserve or whatever? I think it is called Green Hollow. Why do you want to know anyway? I thought you were going back to California for summer break." What? I was going back to Iowa to see my family. Whatever. No, I don't know where that stupid town is. Now can you let me go back to sleep? Sure, I grumble, glancing down the hall at the door leading out to campus. I step out of the dorms and into the sunlight. Maybe the library has some of those old paper maps I can read. At this point, I am just desperate to prove I am not insane. I know Ashwood Hollow is real. I grew up there. Every summer day spent at the creek, every winter bundled up in our little house. 20 years of my life were in the town. My parents were born and raised there, and our hotel, the centerpiece of my entire childhood. How could it disappear like this? I get it as a small town and we don't get much tourism, but to remove it off the internet is a bit of a stretch.
I dial my mama's phone to tell her I am going to be late coming home, but I got the call could not be completed message.
Confused, I try calling my dad. Same thing. My sister. Same thing. I even try calling my family's hotel. Call could not be completed. A knot begins to form in my stomach, tightening with each failed call. Someone is always able to pick up. If not mom, then dad. If not dad, then Rachel. There is always somebody. I can't help but get the feeling something is wrong. I pick up my pace towards the library, hoping to get answers soon so I can get home. Sarah waves at me, her nose not leaving the book she has stuck in front of her face. I wave back frantically, walking towards the atlas section. Most of the atlases the college has in their collection are local maps of Missouri, old explorers maps or whatever. But I eventually find an atlas that includes a map of Iowa nestled between two other unrelated books. I quickly flip through the pages to find South Iowa. My eyes drift right to where Ashwood Hollow should be, and it is blank. Just a field. The entire world comes to a standstill. My breath catches in my throat as I see the year of the map in the far corner. This isn't an old map. I flip to another page to try to cross-reference it. Maybe it is just a mess up. I follow the river that runs through town and it is not there. It is not in any of the maps. I don't even bother putting the atlas back where it is supposed to go. I just put it down and rush back out towards my dorm. Sarah gives me a wave as I leave, but I don't pay her any mind. I quickly dial Mike's number as I speed walk towards my dorm. What's up? Mike says, occasional simulated gunshots from his game coming through. Hey, so I don't know what is going on, but I am freaking out here. I think something bad happened to my home, and I know you said I am from California, but hey man, can you slow down? I can't keep up with all that yapping. Mike interrupts. I take a deep breath and ask him the simple question I called him for: can you come with me to Ashwood Hollow? How far is it? He asks. 5 hours. I think. Hard to tell, GPS isn't pulling it up. There is a short pause as Mike contemplates. I'll get you lunch and dinner or whatever. I just can't go alone. I add. Fine. I'll have my crap packed in a few. The drive is uneventful. We just follow the GPS leading to the closest location the GPS would pull up, an old camping ground. I used to go there as a kid for summer camp. Mike doses in and out of sleep, not being a good navigator. But I didn't expect him to be of much help. I just needed anybody, to see Ashwood Hollow. I am not crazy. It is real. The GPS has me exit the highway and go onto a series of back roads that begin to look familiar. An old windmill off on the east side of the road that has been falling apart for years. An old billboard whose advertisement fell off during a tornado a few years back. I know I am getting close to home. But when I make the last turn that should have led me to Main Street, the road ends. It just ends. No barricades, no signs, nothing but an empty field of grass and trees. My heart pounds in my chest, my anxiety rising by the second. This is wrong. This is all wrong. How can an entire town just vanish without a trace? I put my truck in park and sit dumbfounded. Mike perks his head up, barely waking up. He glances between me and the empty field ahead. Someplace you got here, he mutters. You aren't helping? I snap. I cut the engine and get out of my truck, looking at what appears to be an endless field of grass. Maybe I just got the directions wrong. Maybe I just simply am wrong about where I thought I was. I am so lost in my thoughts, trying to prove myself right, that I don't even hear Mike get out of the truck. He pats me on the shoulder and smiles at me. Look man, if we are going to stop here, may as well hike around. We walk around this field for what seems like hours. I know my home once stood here. I can trace the steps I used to take to school every day. I can even count my steps to where my family's hotel should be. But it is not here. The only landmark of note is the river that ran through what used to be the center of town. Not even indents where the roads once were remain. As the sun began to set, Mike and I started heading back to my truck, which still sits on the edge of the pavement. But as we do, Mike says he sees something. I follow him to a small grove of trees. And then my heart stops. Mike's face pales as he reads the old, withered sign, "Welcome to Ashwood Hollow." Mike and I began back down the road towards our school. I take the same familiar roads I once took away from my home, not realizing it would be my last time. We pass by a few landmarks I remember. But when we pass by the billboard, half of an advertisement remains. We didn't see it on the way in because it was facing away from us. But my stomach turns to ice when I read it. Come visit the historic Hillwood Hollow Hotel. You turn at the next exit. The drive back to campus was done in nearly perfect silence. Neither of us knew what to say to one another. I wasn't crazy. Ashwood Hollow is real. But it seems as if the world forgot about it. As if it was erased from this planet entirely, other than two signs. I don't know what happened to my family. I don't know what happened to anyone from Ashwood Hollow. But as I sit in my dorm room writing this all out, I know they are out there somewhere. So I'm asking you all, have you heard of Ashwood Hollow?